Optimal minimal.
At this altitude, I can run flat out for a half mile before my hands start shaking.
Can I answer your personal question?
Now would seem an appropriate time.
What if I did the opposite?
I'm a cybernetic organism, living tissue over metal endoskeleton.
Me too, Ferriss, show.
This episode is brought to you by 99 Designs. 99 Designs is the global creative platform that makes it easy for designers and clients to work together. From logos to apps, business cards, packaging to books, you name it, 99 Designs is the go-to design resource for any budget. Right now, my listeners, that's you guys, can get $50 off a logo and brand identity package from 99 Designs, plus a free upgrade that lets you promote your project on the platform, which is an additional $99 value by checking out 99designs.com/Tim50. That's TIM50. So 99designs.com/Tim50. As many of you know, I've used 99 Designs for many, many years now. I've used them for book covers, including mock-ups for The 4-Hour Body, which went on to become a #1 New York Times bestseller, illustrations for the multi-volume The Tao of Seneca, it's an ebook series basically, and other graphic design projects, and I've been very impressed by the quality of their designers and illustrators. And you can check out all sorts of stuff like The Tao of Seneca to get an idea. They're really mind-boggling. Most recently, I used 99 Designs to update the illustrations and layout of my 5 Morning Rituals ebook. This is a PDF that I offer as an incentive to get people to sign up for my newsletter. The illustrations inside are gorgeous, and I loved working with the designer who we ended up selecting for the project. You can take a look at that. This is a real-world example of the type of thing that I use 99 Designs for at 99designs.com/Tim50. 99 Designs Designer Search Tool connects you directly with one designer based on design category or industry specialization, style, skill level, availability, and more. You just check off the boxes that you need to satisfy the criteria you want, and it will bring up the best matches. Or you can start a contest. You invite the entire community to take a shot at your project, then you pick your favorite. So, to get $50 off your first logo and brand identity package, as well as additional promotion on the platform with the free upgrade, please visit 99designs.com/Tim50. That's 99designs.com/Tim50 and click on the link on the landing page. Check it out, 99designs.com/Tim50. This episode is brought to you by Charlotte's Web, which makes a CBD oil, a hemp extract that has become one of my go-to tools. Now, I have never really talked about CBD oil, and cannabis has never really been the plant for me. I know we're talking about hemp, but nonetheless, after several nights of inexplicable insomnia, this was about a year ago, I just could not get to sleep to save my life. And after other fixes failed, so melatonin, California poppy, extract, an elite athlete introduced me to this non-psychoactive extract, and bam! Problem solved. I had some of the best sleep that I'd had in months. Now, I don't use sleep aids on a daily basis, but this has become part of my toolkit, and I hope to be exploring other applications soon. CBD oil products have exploded in popularity in the health and wellness and fitness worlds, and Charlotte's Web is one of the top players that offers broad spectrum hemp extract with CBD in the form of oils, capsules, and topical products. Charlotte's Web products will not get you high, so that maybe that is good news, maybe bad news to you, but it does have some powerful benefits and applications, and it works with your body's existing endocannabinoid system. Endo meaning from within, like endo versus exoskeleton, for instance. So endocannabinoid system works with your body. Some of the most common uses are for relief from everyday stressors, help in supporting restful sleep, which is what I most often use it for, to bring about a sense of calm and focus. A lot of my friends use it for that. CBD is also known or becoming known for helping athletes to recover from exercise-induced inflammation. Charlotte's Web hemp extract has naturally occurring terpenes, flavonoids, and other valuable hemp compounds that work synergistically to heighten positive effects, sometimes referred to as the entourage effect, which you guys can look up, making it more complete than single compound CBD alternatives, or at least that is what I've been told. I do not know much about CBD alternatives nor single compound. In any case, check it out. This stuff has really worked for me. So jump over to cwhemp.com/Tim, CW is in Charlotte's Web, cwhemp.com/Tim, to take a quick quiz which will determine the best product for your particular aims, lifestyle, etc. And they ship to all 50 states. Charlotte's Web are offering listeners of this podcast 10% off of their purchase. While there are some exclusions, I personally use the extra strength CBD oils or the extra strength capsules, and you can see what might be a fit for you on that page. And there is a 30-day risk-free guarantee, so why not try it out? So get 10% off of your purchase at cwhemp.com/Tim. And disclaimer, these statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Enjoy. Why, hello, you sexy little minx. This is Tim Ferriss, and welcome to another episode of The Tim Ferriss Show, where it is my job to interview and deconstruct world-class performers, whether they come from the worlds of chess, sports, business. It really doesn't matter. We're trying to spot patterns of excellence. What are the habits, the routines, the favorite books, the morning exercises, whatever it might be, that you can test and apply in your own lives. And my guest today is a friend. We've been trying to make the podcast happen for quite a few years now, and he is a polymath. You need to listen to this episode. Nick Kokonas is his name. Last name is spelled Kokonas. Nick Kokonas on Instagram at @nkokonas, on Twitter at Nick Kokonas. Nick is the co-owner and co-founder of the Alinea Group of restaurants, which includes Alinea, Next, the Aviary Roister, I think I'm getting that right, and the Aviary New York City. NYC, that is. He's also the founder and CEO of Tock, Inc., a reservations and CRM system for restaurants with more than 2.5 million diners and clients in more than 20 countries. Now, you might be thinking, wait a second, restaurants, food, that's not my thing. Doesn't matter. We're going to get into philosophy. We're going to get into derivatives trading. We're going to get into books like Fooled by Randomness, The Problems of Philosophy, let's see, Peregrinations of an Epicurean, and how Nick seems to break every industry or type of business he goes into in the most productive way possible. It's a really fun conversation. But back to the bio. Alinea, Alinea, which, by the way, I based basically an entire section of The 4-Hour Chef on, which was one of my books, because I was so impressed. Alinea has been named the best restaurant in America and best restaurant in the world by organizations and lists as diverse as the James Beard Foundation. They give James Beard awards out, which are kind of like the Oscars in the food world. World's 50 Best, TripAdvisor, Yelp, Gourmet Magazine, and Elite Traveler. His restaurants have won nearly every accolade afforded to them, despite the fact that he does not, or didn't at least, have any experience whatsoever in restaurants. And he had some amazing, amazing partners we get into. But that set of beginner's eyes is really, really crucial. And we dig into how he cultivates that a lot. Nick has been, he uses this word, a subversive entrepreneur, which I agree with, and angel investor since 1996. He spent a decade as a very successful derivatives trader, has co-written 3 books, and believes in radical transparency in markets and business. His latest effort is the Aviary Cocktail Book, which is perhaps the most gorgeous book I've ever seen. I got an early copy. It is stunning. It is just unbelievable what they've done. It is self-published, has already sold, that is pre-sold, nearly $1 million in copies, and is being released right now, shipped right now in October of 2018. It is truly, I think, the most beautiful book I've ever seen and held in my hands. So you can find out all about it. You can see all sorts of photos and samples at theaviarybook.com. That's www.theaviarybook.com, AVIARY. Check it out. So I'll leave it at that. Please listen to this episode, even if you have no interest in food. It doesn't matter. We span so many different businesses, industries, life lessons. I had a blast with this, and I hope you do as well. Here too, Nick Kokonas. Nick, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tim. Awesome to be here finally.
Yeah, we have the benefit of having spent some time together, and I've been fed a lot of caffeine by you. And you're also great help with the 4-Hour Chef. So I wanted to, right off the bat, thank you for that. It was a really lovely experience.
It was kind of a fun thing, because I remember when you sent me like a preview of the book, and then you called me to say like, hey, do you want to say anything about it? And I was like on a chairlift, and I was like, by the time I get off this chairlift, I will have a blurb for you. Which was such pressure.
Which meant a lot. And pressure, I think, is the word to describe so much about you and your life. I want to say trajectory, but I'm not even sure that is the right word. And I thought a fun way to kick off the conversation would be to share with people listening some of the back and forth that we had when we were brainstorming what a podcast might look like. Because certainly I don't think of you first and foremost as a food guy per se. And we were having this exchange via text and then via email. And I thought I'd just read one of your responses as we were swapping different ideas. And I'll probably edit for space a little bit here, but not by much. And here we go. I'm a huge believer in radical transparency in business. I give numbers and burn bridges with big companies because I think that a lot of times people don't ask the basic questions in publishing. For instance, how much did that book cost to print? How many did it sell? Oddly, those numbers are very hard to come by. I dug for months years ago to do the Alinea book the right way. For bars, why does a bartender wash dishes and talk to customers? We've redesigned the bar experience and won best bar in the world. For restaurants, why is it the only form of entertainment that has only a mutual promise to show up? And then it goes into behavioral economics, and in parentheses, I don't even know how to pronounce this last name correctly. Richard Thaler, or is it Taylor?
Yeah, Thaler.
Thaler,
yeah.
As a friend and investor, just won the Nobel Prize. Investing, been beating the market for nearly 30 years. Everything, in all caps, is about asymmetric risk-taking and information, and yet people's perception of risk or of what I do is that it's risky. It is not. And in a separate exchange, when we were talking about many of the topics that you could talk about outside of, say, restaurants, bars, and so on, even though that's been a big part of your life in recent history, many of these different experiments, explorations, portions of your career, topics that you could talk about, and then going into what you said, they come down to a single thought, really. Wherever there is opaque information that should be obvious, run to that gap. So I struggle with where to even begin with the 20 options that we have here, but maybe you could explain to me how behavioral economics and Richard Thaler fit into this, just for curiosity's sake.
Yeah, I mean, well, I'll go back to the word you used, options, because I started out back in 1992 or 3 studying options trading, derivatives trading. And I think there's a huge misconception about what that is because of movies, because of The Big Short, because of, Wall Street, all of that. It's a bit like playing a game of chess for a living or being the house at a casino, that sort of thing. It's about taking, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of decisions per day and pretending it's like a big decision tree. And any given decision is probably got, if you're really good, 48% chance of being wrong. So you have to be really, really good at constantly being comfortable being wrong, but knowing that your overall number of decisions that you're going to be right more than you're wrong. And so, I know there's a big theme. A lot of the folks that you have on, they talk about success or failure or how to measure those things. And I kind of don't look at it as success or failure with anything. I look at it as just is my pattern of decisions correct? And then getting back to your actual question with Professor Thaler and behavioral economics, and I mean, essentially what they're looking at is decision making. What drives people to make certain decisions, what's rational about those decisions, what is mostly irrational or emotional, or what decisions do we make that people don't even realize they're making a decision, which is often the case as well. And then if you think about it, every single form of what we do, art, commerce, science, picking a mate, all those things, comes down to a whole bunch of decisions that you make without often really thinking about the decision itself. Not that you can go around walking around going, wow, I've just made another decision. But when you are doing, business or starting a company or publishing a book or whatever it may be, you can be intentional about that and realize that it's going to be an iterative process. And so I think that's been not only the case for me in learning how to filter things through that mindset, but like when you said there isn't really a trajectory, like I kind of look at everything I've done as the same in a way, even though other people look at it and go like, wow, you went from being a derivatives trader to owning restaurants. Like, that's weird. And I studied philosophy in college. So like people are like, how do you go from philosophy to finance? And to me, it was all the same thing.
How is that particular transition, or rather progression, I suppose, from philosophy to finance is one that you and I haven't really talked about. And that one is interesting I'd love to explore for a second, and we're going to go into a million different nooks and crannies.
Yeah.
But do you feel like studying philosophy undergrad was an asset that then later helped you, or was it just an interest you explored en route to other things?
No, I can't remotely imagine having not done that. And the way that actually I did it was really interesting. I had no intention of, when I got to college, I thought I'd study political science, economics, pre-law kind of thing, something like that. And my very second week at Colgate University, a wonderful professor who just passed away last year at 94 years old, really great mentor to me, Professor Jerome Balmuth, was a tenured professor at Colgate for almost 60 years, pulled me aside, Introduction to Logic, 101, and basically said, what are you studying here? And I told him, and he said, no, you're going to be a philosophy major. And I'm going to teach you how to think. And he was the kind of guy, there's this great scene in A River Runs Through It where the dad, every time the kid writes an essay, like the young, fisherman kid writes an essay and he brings it to his father to be graded, he gives it back to him and says, half as long again. And that's long before that movie ever came out. Professor Balmuth would essentially assign a paper to the class and say it should be about 15 pages. And people would be like, well, how long? And he'd always say how long is a piece of string? It's however long it needs to be. And then he would tell me, yours can't be longer than 3 pages. and people would be jealous, wow, you only have to write 3 pages. If you take it seriously, that is a much, much harder thing to do. So he really trained me, as well as a number of other professors there, to be clear in thinking, succinct, to understand what logic was, to process information, and really to look for parallels in different fields and different fields of thought. And so, man, when I got out of school, I went to law school for a day and a half. I'd gotten into Penn, a joint JD PhD program at Penn. And as soon as I kind of knew who the other folks were and what their desires and trajectories were, I was like, oh, this isn't actually a good fit for me. And I remember my future father-in-law told my now wife, then girlfriend, that I was in danger of becoming an intellectual bum because I dropped out of law school before I really entered law school. And I floundered around for a little while. But if you grew up in Chicago, you end up meeting people who had this unusual lifestyle, and that was back in the days pre-internet, pre-electronic trading, pre-high frequency trading, where there was literally people on a giant trading floor shouting at each other, and you either were attracted to the, almost animalistic nature of that, and for me it was a huge challenge because there are people down there that had PhDs from MIT, and then there was people who were butchers that went down there with $100,000 and just kicked ass. and so it wasn't about your level of education or any of the stuff I already talked about. It was about, can you show up every day, and every day's game day, and be really disciplined and very clear-headed with chaos around you.
How did you get introduced to that world?
If you grow up in Chicago, some of these guys, and some of them are flashy. And I can remember the exact moment. I'm not going to name a name here, as you'll find out why in a second. But I was walking down the street. I was 6 months out of college, kind of didn't know what I was going to do. And I was walking down the street and I bumped into a guy I knew in high school, and, he wasn't the best student. He didn't try the hardest. And I was like, hey, what are you doing now? And he was like, well, I'm just rehabbing these homes. And I thought literally like, oh, he's a construction worker. And I was like, what are you doing with them? He's like, well, I just bought this block. And I'm turning this all over. This is a true story. I mean, this is so not like, a good reason to do something. But I looked at him and I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, yeah, I skipped college and I started out as a runner on the floor of the Merc. And now I own like 25 condos and 3 townhomes and I trade. And I kind of went like, wow, I don't know what. I knew a little bit about it. I'd been down on the floor before just visiting, but I was kind of like, that's fascinating. Like, that is a truly fascinating thing. And, I went down, visited the floor. I had to fake my resume in the wrong direction to get a job. It's a true story. Like, people lie on their resume all the time. I'm probably the only person that got rid of my degree and my academic awards and all that, because, to get a clerk job on the floor, the last thing they wanted was someone with a good degree, Phi Beta Kappa, magna cum laude, all that stuff. So I faked my resume, got a $5 an hour job and looked for a mentor. And I found a guy named Frank Zorino, who was at Chicago Research and Trading, which also was founded by a philosophy major. It's actually very common. And
why is that common?
I wish I knew the answer. I don't know the answer. I do know that there's 3 or 4 of the largest trading firms in the world are run by philosophy majors. And if you look back at my class, just of there's a few professors in there, but there are people who make movies. There's a guy who runs an ad agency, a large ad agency. Like, it's a really interesting path. It's not just like studying physics, like I know some great physicists who are great in whatever they do. And right. I think it's a similar discipline of abstract thought. Mm-hmm. Like, I can't think of anything worse than studying business. Like, it just seems like a terrible thing to study to me.
Is that because it's like the surface of the waves in the ocean topically? It's just so non-transferable in a sense. And then as you go lower and lower to the kind of slower moving layers, that's just more multidisciplinary in terms of studying like the basics of how things work or how people think.
Yeah, I think it's almost like it's how to do something or how to manage something, but not why to do it. Right. And so if you're taught in 1992, if I went and got an MBA, I would have been taught a certain kind of management that 6 years later with the internet would have gotten blown up. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it's like I always ask the why question, when we're, you were mentioning like the book publishing or a bar, like, I just look at some things and I just go like, why is that? Like, why does it work that way? And oftentimes the people most entrenched in a system have no idea why. They're like the 3rd or 4th generation of person within that system. And they have no idea why a school bell rings in the morning, for example, or why a bartender is washing the dishes. And often I don't know the real answer, but I come up with alternative ones, at least, that suit my narrative, I guess.
Undervalued skill, by the way, in some cases, right? You got to be careful, but very, 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 very interesting. I want to pause here, partially because I'm over caffeinated. I was inspired by my nostalgia related to your double espressos. But why did the professor pull you aside? What did that early undergrad professor in Logic 101 see in you, whether he explained it or not later, I don't know, that led him to take a special interest in you?
Well, I think I was prepared and earnest because I was mostly terrified. He had a reputation of being kind of like he was a Socratic method teacher. He was pretty harsh. Colgate was a very small classes, and there was a class of 80 people, and he kind of wanted to whittle it down to a more manageable number. And his method to do that was just to kick your ass. And I remember, I mean, he probably, as great as he was, I doubt he would survive starting out at a college campus now. I mean, I literally saw him light fire to someone's notebook once when he was asking people like examples of how to put out a fire. And this one guy was just stuttering because he was so in fear. And so he just lit his notebook on fire and he stamped it. And the kid threw it on the ground, stamped on it. He's like, "You could smother it." Sure. And he called everyone. He memorized every person's last name, and it was Mr. and Ms. And I remember the specific day. He was literally back to the. This is like right out of a movie. He his back to the class, writing on a chalkboard. Some logic problems, symbolic logic. And the guy next to me had no shot at getting it. Right, none. Right. And so he said his name, and I wrote on the paper on my desk so he could see it, like what the answer was. And then without missing a beat or turning around, he was like, "Mr. Kokonas, please do not help him. There is no way in hell he could possibly have done that without your help." and this is like 2 or 3 weeks in, right? And he spun around and he saw that I didn't have my book. And he said, "Mr. Kokonas, where's your book?" And I said, it's in my dorm room, professor. And he said, "Well, a lot of good it's doing you there." I said, "On the contrary, it must apparently be doing me a lot of good there." And he said, "I'll see you after class." So I thought I was getting kicked out. And there was like a line forming to create office hours or to like ask to be transferred out or whatever. And when I got to the front, he said, "Follow me." And I followed him to his office. And I swear, I mean, he's, running through the fall, New England fall. And I thought I was going to get kicked out of the class. And when I closed the door, I turned around, he has feet up on the desk, and he said, "Where are you from? What do you want to do here?" And that was it. Like he took me under his wing. I was very fortunate. It's like I never knew. Here's the amazing part. I never knew the guy liked me until 10 years after I graduated. And then I was treated like a member of his family at his funeral 30 years later.
Huh.
Right. So really fascinating person, really fascinating, moment in my life where, I don't know, someone saw something in me and kind of went like, "I'm going to make an investment in this person," and never asked for anything back, ever.
How did you not know that he liked you? Did he withhold in some way so that you wouldn't get a big head or something along those lines? Did he not want to get overly attached to you so he wouldn't express it?
No. I think I was 19 years old and I didn't know that the people you like, you hold to a higher standard probably.
Right.
And so consequently, it was really like he beat the shit out of me in a good way. You know what I mean? Like it's like if you have someone who's teaching you something and they invest their time in you and they think you have a chance of being good, they work you harder than the folks around you. So the people that I thought he liked, he was just being nice to because he didn't think they had a chance.
Right. Yeah, he didn't care. He wasn't invested.
Yeah. And so with me, I think it would be like, he would be talking to my English professor without me even knowing and being like, "That paper sucks. He can do a lot better than that. Give him a C on that one." And I was like, what's going on? Like all of a sudden that class got hard. I didn't know. I had no idea. It was an interesting, lucky, fortunate place to be at that time.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to get back to the Merc, but before we do, philosophy. I'm endlessly fascinated by philosophy, but I'm also a nerd and kind of academic and pedantic, and have spent a lot of time in school. For people who are listening to this who are, say, already in their careers, or maybe they're in their early 20s thinking of starting a company, but are entrepreneurially either involved or inclined, would you suggest, if they don't have any exposure to philosophy, that they read any particular books or resources or explore it in any way? Or would you say, actually, that was an intermediate step to something else. You would probably be better off studying X, Y, and Z. Is there like a starter kit or something you would recommend to folks who don't have the philosophy exposure?
Yeah. I think part of it is if you read a book in isolation, it's not as rich of an experience as discussing those ideas within that context. That said, if you're the kind of person that loves to read and explore ideas, I mean, there's hardly a better place. It's a matter of finding what you enjoy. I happen to love The Problems of Philosophy, which Bertrand Russell wrote, sort of about Wittgenstein's ideas, but before Wittgenstein published. And it's written in plain language. It's not hard to understand. Certainly Nietzsche is more like philosophy with some weird sugar coating of something on top of it. And man, like as a young male, reading Nietzsche for the first time, I was like, fuck yeah. It's not passive. Like I think people think of philosophers as like Zen monks sitting there quietly contemplating the universe. I think what it is it's people grappling with all the same questions and curiosity that we all have if you pause to think about it. Mm-hmm. And so it's so big, that it's not just, Descartes, I think, therefore I am. It's kind of every little bit of that. Back to read Lucretius. Like he had the atomic.
Could you spell that? I'm going to be the first one to admit that.
Lucretius? Oh, I can't.
Oh, Lucretius.
Yeah, Lucretius. Yeah. I mean, he.
Lucretius.
Yeah, I'm a terrible speller. Yeah. So never ask me to spell anything.
We'll put it in the show notes. For people.
Right. But it's like you read that or read this great book called The Swerve, which is about this monk ages ago that sort of found that book and then rewrote it and saved it for history. Like that reads like a murder mystery. Like you don't necessarily need to start with the philosophy. You can start with the things around it. But it's like I continue to find sort of the world of ideas endlessly inspirational. And then, by the way, steal them and use them in whatever you're doing. Like they're there for you.
Lucretius, Lucretius. Titus Lucretius Carus was a Roman poet and philosopher. We'll put that in the show notes. I want to second Bertrand Russell also. I haven't read Bertrand Russell in so many ages, but it is very digestible. It is not dressed up in $10 words when 10-cent words would suffice. A lot of his writing is really powerful. And I also just wanted to mention for folks that, and I just thought about this, ages and ages ago, I felt like I had certain gaps in my education after college, and I ended up, I don't know why this didn't occur to me earlier, but somebody mentioned that Stanford, UC Berkeley, these top tier universities all had extended or adult education classes taught by professors and junior professors. I mean, this is the same team who's teaching.
Yeah.
And those are very readily accessible.
Well, and even MIT OpenCourseWare, so many colleges now have taken that model and put great classes online. And I know that every now and then I'm surprised what I find on there, and get sucked into like an all-nighter of taking some college class, that I know nothing about, and it's so far over my head. But it kind of refuels you again to go like, oh, like there are huge gaps where I know nothing. And the older you get, the harder it is to start into something new. I find, at least, because it feels like the mountain's too big,
I would actually not to pull a Nick. Actually, sir, on the contrary, sir, my book is doing me a lot of good in my dorm room.
That's right.
I think one of your superpowers is that you ask the fundamental why questions about long-standing assumptions or conventional wisdom in different fields, and the more you have done that, the more obvious it is to you to do it as a starting point. In a way. So let's go back to the Merc. We can go in any direction, of course, but you step into this Lord of the Flies / gladiatorial arena with butchers and PhDs and so on. Then what? Like, at what point, is there a point when you're like, okay, I actually do think I could be good at this?
No, I for real, no. I was down there, and I had made a fatal error of leaving school. and everyone told me it was a fatal error. And
this is leaving the law school.
Yeah, and I remember being down there, and what I was doing was so brainless. It was literally, you take this piece of paper over to that guy, and then that guy would yell at you, and you would rip the paper out of your hand, and then you go get another one. It was literally that brain dead. And I was desperately looking to learn what was going on around me. And of course, I bought books on finance and commodities and options and all that, and they were completely ridiculous and opaque and academic, and they looked like they had no relationship to what was going on there at all. I started taking classes that were run at the Merc on mock trading and just learning the hand signals and things like that, which were fine, but didn't really teach you how to trade. And I spent, time interviewing with big companies like Goldman Sachs and Societe Generale and whatnot, because I did have the academic background where I would get the interview, I would be able to take the test, I would do well on their math and psychology tests, I would get offered a job as a trader, and then I would look at the contract. This is a key thing. People get out of college, they get offered a job. I think I'm the only one who ever read the employment contract. And what it said in there was basically like they could do anything they want with me for 3 years. Like, I don't even necessarily need to be a trader. That's what I was interested in doing. But they could ship me to France and have me do something totally different. I could be an analyst or, God knows what. And so when I would question that, they'd be like, man, you should be really happy. Like, we had, 300 applicants for this and we offered 8 positions. Like, just take it. And I was kind of like,
totally your style.
I was just kind of like, I grew up, I'd be remiss not to say that, like, my dad modeled. My dad was an entrepreneur by necessity because his dad died when he was really young. He fought both at the end of World War II. He was drafted into the Navy at the end of World War II, was dismissed honorably after 16, 18 months because they were downsizing the Navy. And then he was barely young enough to be drafted into the Army for the Korean War. And when he got out, he had no usable skills. So he went to work at the grocery store that he started working at when he was 12 years old, saved up all of his money from the Army and the Navy and bought the store. And so as I was growing up, my hero was my dad, who was not an academic, who was not what people would think of as like an executive in a suit or whatever, but did really well. He had bought property and real estate. He owned a temporary labor office that supplied unskilled laborers to factories and conventions and whatnot. That was a really good business, and he had a lot of common sense smarts. He was horrified that I didn't go to law school, but meanwhile I was modeling what he did. And so when I got down there, I was like, you have to own your own situation, and so when I was offered those jobs, I was like, well, I don't really see myself working for someone else, and I found a guy who also felt that way, and he was working for a big company, and they didn't want to make him a trader because he was too much of a quant. Like, he was really well educated, he was really mathematical. He wanted to prove them wrong, so he took a small amount of money and started trading currency options. And when I found him, I instantly knew that this was the right person because I talked to dozens of people and no one was like him. And then he said he didn't want to hire me. Like, he didn't want to hire anyone.
How did you meet him? Do you remember how you guys met?
Yeah, I was just introduced to him through. He was back then. If you're a trader or even a trading company, you have a clearing firm like Goldman Sachs. At the time, there was a company called First Options, and he cleared First Options. And back then, you would literally have to take the elevator up to key punch in all of the cards into like a computer that was, up on 17 floors away.
Wow.
Ancient times. And I met him through being introduced to him there. After talking to him, I knew he was the sort of geeky intellectual that I needed. And then when he told me like that he didn't want to hire me because he just hired some clerk, I was like, no. Like, I will pay you to work for you. And he was like, this is really strange, And I explained to him what I just said. It's like, look, I've been here 6 months. I set a goal for myself of getting, becoming like getting on a badge, it was called, like leasing a seat and actually trading within a year. And I was like, I need to get going on this. Like, I need someone that's going to teach me options. And it's fascinating because, he then hired me for, I want to say it was $400 a week or something like that. And, I stood right next to him all day, every day. And he taught me options theory from scratch, better than any college ever could, to the point where you're looking, 3 derivatives in, it's not just volatility curve, but the curve of the curve. And, as soon as I started grasping this and going deeper down that rabbit hole, the more I liked it as a puzzle. It wasn't, certainly the money had an appeal, but it was also, hey, here's this giant competition. It's like playing a huge multifaceted chess game that no one's going to get exactly right. But like I said earlier, it's about making hundreds of decisions a day. And even when you get 10 in a row that come up tails, that the next one's 50-50, and that discipline was interesting. That was more about teaching yourself the psychology of standing there while everyone told you were wrong, or you were like physically small, or you were too educated or too serious. I mean, you can't imagine how much of a fraternity house that place was. Everything in Wolf of Wall Street, I have seen. I haven't lived, but I've seen it all.
Yeah.
And, I started hiring very shortly after. I started trading, and about a year later, I left and started my own company with almost nothing. And I hired my first employee, who became my business partner for the last 25 years. And I taught him what I learned. And I hired people that I considered corporate refugees, people who worked for companies and decided that independence was better.
Why did you leave after a year?
He was moving over to the Chicago Board of Trade, and I had found a couple of awesome programmers to help build this options analysis software. And he sort of offered me up to run like some of the operations at the Mercantile Exchange when he went over to trade the bonds at the Board of Trade. And, he was a really, really smart guy, and he made me a deal that when you analyzed it very carefully, got worse over time. And I just kind of went, it's been great, and I've learned a ton, and we've made each other a bunch of money, and it's a win-win. But I really wanted to do my own thing. Like, I wanted to be the captain of my own ship, I guess. And thankfully, this guy, Jim Hansen, who's still one of my dearest friends, sort of had an option to stay, with that company or come at a completely underfunded company. I mean, thinking back, it was so stupid, from a risk perspective. But it was asymmetric, far more upside than downside. And it worked out really well. And we spent most of our time as we hired people and taught them how to do this. It was mostly like psychology training. It was mostly standing around after hours and saying, what's 7 times 28? And screaming it at each other like a drill sergeant until the person couldn't remember what 9 times 3 was anymore. And
wait, why did you do that?
Well, you had to be quick. You had to be quick on basic mental agility.
I see.
So if you bought 450 contracts and it was a 20 delta, you needed to be able to do what's 20% of 450. It's 90, but you need to do that precisely with numbers that are not so round.
Right.
You need to be willing to not be perfect, and you need to make that decision instantaneously, and realizing that it could cost you $50,000 to $100,000 if you get it right or wrong. And you have to be really, really comfortable with that. And so what did we do? Well, we stood around and we turned people's brains into mush until, like, literally I had people punch me, cry, run out. It was it was no, I mean, it sounds awful, but it's amazing training because the rest of the world moves much slower. Yeah. So any other decisions that I've made in business since then have felt glacial in pace.
Yeah. There's also something to be said for making the training in some or all respects harder than the competition, right? I mean, the adage of the more you sweat during peacetime, the less you bleed during wartime. I mean, the best competitors I've met in many, many fields often strive to make their training and the toil of their preparation harder than what they expect to face when they actually.
It's why we love watching big time sports. Like when it matters, there are certain people that are you can almost look at them and go, oh, that poor person's going to fade, and then you hope they don't, right? You hope all that training, pays off. When you see someone, I love golf for all the same reasons. It's like, just a series of constant failures. And then so when you look at someone who can pull that rabbit out of the hat, at exactly the right moment, it's pretty wonderful to see. And the thing I loved about my time down there, even though I burned out of it after 10 years, is that there were moments where I did absolutely. I mean, I have friends they'll listen to this and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, I remember that time in the S&P pit. You really got this right," But I made some completely stupid decisions. But mostly on the measure, when things got crazy, I was able to perform more than not. I remember like Greenspan's irrational exuberance speech was like a formative moment where I kind of went like, "Wow, I can actually." I can not only hang in this environment, I can thrive in it. And, you get home soaking wet with sweat. It was a physical job. Like it was really blue collar in a lot of ways. And, it's like I got home that day and I was like, that was what I prepped my last 6 years for. It was very satisfying. It sounds like it is an awful thing in a way, right? Like it's just about pure commerce. It serves a purpose of price discovery and all of that, but any individual person isn't really the one doing that, So I think that there are negatives to the whole system as well in hindsight. But man, at the time, it just felt like great mental training.
What would you recommend to people who are listening and are having this flashback to the introductory text exchange about beating the market over a long period of time, who are hoping to become better investors? And you can take that anywhere you want, but are there any particular tools, books, mental models, anything that you would recommend?
It's really, really hard. I think the mental model is asymmetric risk. I always look for something that the upside is, 3 to 4x the downside. Obviously, quantifying those is very difficult, but that's the key. Everything I try to do is asymmetric. And then even though Nassim Taleb is a bit of a pedantic goofball on Twitter, his book Fooled by Randomness is awesome. Yeah. That was the one that preceded Black Swan, and I think Black Swan's great. It's fine. But Fooled by Randomness is I think the better of all of his books, because it just encapsulates everything that people price things incorrectly. All you have to do is walk through a casino. Yeah, you walk through a casino and you see everybody pricing their outcomes incorrectly. The entire city is built on that. And, if you could get in your head. literally. Yeah, literally. And I don't take any pleasure. Like people are like, oh, you must love gambling or whatever. And it's like, I would never sit down to a blackjack table because I know that, there's a 49.5% chance that I'm going to win. And that's the wrong way.
Yeah. The Fooled by Randomness has come up a number of times. I haven't read it in ages because it is one of his earlier books. But Howard Marks also brought this up recently when I was chatting with him, and it is an exceptional book, I think, for developing a new lens on life, not just investing. When you are investing for yourself now, how do you think about risk? Because this is a word that has popped up a few times. But a lot of, how do you personally think about risk in your life? Do you, for instance, like some startup founders, look at the risk as the various early stage startups, restaurants, bars, and so on that you're involved with, and then you play it safe in your other kind of asset allocation? How do you think about risk in your life or in investing?
Yeah, that's a pretty difficult question. I think that if you look at everything that I've done business wise, everybody would say that the failure rate is super high in what we do. So trading, they used to say 1 out of 100 people that goes down there breaks even their first year, and fewer out of that one, take another 100 of those ones, and less than 1 in 100 of those becomes a millionaire. And I went, great. It's like the old Jim Carrey. So you're saying there's a chance, you know, right? You know, and then you go to the restaurant business, and people, oh yeah, 95% of all restaurants go out of business in their first 2 years, and I'm like going, great, you know, that's perfect.
Why do you have that response? Is it because
then I'm going to start. I'm doing a software startup now too.
Yeah, go for it.
So the higher, the smaller the hoop, the more interesting it is to figure it out. And once you're up there and you know how to jump up through that little hoop, there's fewer people playing that game, you know. And the other thing is, I remember right when I was going to start building Alinea with Grant, I was talking to a restaurant owner. And by all accounts, he was pretty successful. He had 4 or 5 restaurants. And one of them I really liked a lot. And we'd go there a lot. And I kind of got to know him a little bit. And he said, so, you know, what are you up to? And I said, well, actually, I'm building a restaurant now. And he looked at me. He said, it's a terrible business. You don't want to do it. Like, incredible failure rate. Terrible. And I was like, why did you build the next 4?
How did he respond to that?
No one does. That's kind of like with, we'll get to it, I'm sure, but that's like the way I was with the publishing thing. It's like, hey man, people keep printing books, and yet I can't figure out any of the information, and yet they're going to give me like $300,000 or $400,000 to write a book. Like, something's remiss here. Like, you know what I mean? I've never written a book before, but yet someone's going to write me a $400,000 check. There must be a lot of money on the other side of that bet. And so consequently, like, I always try to look for the high, small hoops. And then I spend my time learning as much as I can, and then I jump through that hoop. It's both more interesting, I think, and I also think, getting back to the asymmetry of risk, those are the ones that, you might have well, first of all, do you really have a 95% failure rate if you put in all that effort?
Yeah.
I don't think so, you know. And second of all, so I think they priced it wrong, so to speak. And then second of all, like, man, that's where the fun is. Like, that gets you up in the morning and going to work.
Yeah. This is where, among many, many other places, averages can be very, very misleading, right? And I always end up in public Q&As and things of this type hearing various numbers and stats thrown around, many of which I think have no basis on any data whatsoever. But there's we only use 10% of our brains. Not true. There is the 9 out of 10 startups fail within the first year, or whatever the stat is. And the first question that occurs to me with a number like the latter, or I guess a ratio, is, well, is it because the model is difficult? Is it because startups are inherently that high risk, or are there other plausible explanations? Is it that 9 out of 10 people who attempt to start a startup don't do any of the necessary due diligence?
Correct. Yes. Yeah. I mean, the number of I've been on a couple of like graduate school, entrepreneurship, contests and whatnot. And one of the things that always happens there is what I call like the time machine. Someone comes up with a business plan that is like, I'm going to build a time machine. Now, of course, it's not really a time machine, but I have seen ones that defy the laws of physics, for example, or new pipeline technology, but they have no idea. Like, it's just a pipe dream. They've done none of the engineering, So you kind of look at that and you go, you haven't really done the homework yet at all. And then there's a lot of people that come to me and they've spent like 6 months doing their logo and the name of the company, but they don't actually have a piece of software yet.
Right.
Oh, I'm just going to hire someone to build that for me, or an app. I get so many apps pitched to me, and they don't know how to build an app, but they've got a logo and an idea. And I was like, that's a good way to blow $500,000 on a consultant.
Oh man,
You must get that 50 times worse than I do.
Yeah, I mean, what I tend to get, and this is part of the reason why I stopped all the startup stuff a couple of years ago, is it got to the point where 90% of the pitches I received, which were unsolicited, would be along the lines of hi, comma, like not even a first name, or it'd be like, hi, Tim, or hey, Tim, even better. I am the CEO or co-founder of X. We are raising this at this valuation. We are oversubscribed, but we could squeeze you in for $25K if you're really interested because we admire ABC. Here are the docs attached.
Yeah, right.
Let us know if you're interested in the next 60 minutes, which might end up, my default response to anything like that where people are pressuring me for a fast decision is no. Like it's just,
yeah, correct.
It's like I've lost very little money, saying no to those things. But coming back to the examples that you were giving and what we were talking about, bridging over to restaurants and food. So you're being told how restaurants are an awful business. Food is an awful business. And I remember someone told me long, long time ago, they're like, yeah, if you want to lose money, go into magazines or restaurants, right? And at what point, and I have a little bit of the backstory, but not all the details. Like at what point do you decide to go into or get involved with restaurants and why?
Well, so I left trading in about 2002. 2001 it was a tough year between 9/11, which was my father died in February of that year. I was burnt out after going really hard for so long, and we built up a pretty good sized company too, and I merged with a firm in New York, and I kind of needed a break, but didn't know how to really take one at the time. And so I left trading, and I immediately kind of panicked because here's something that I really genuinely enjoyed, but didn't kind of know what I wanted to do next, and started doing consulting for a small hedge fund, and then I just didn't know what to do, and I had an awesome wife and a young son, and things were good, but I was kind of panicked. I was playing golf with ex-athletes, because who else is 34 years old and can play golf on a Wednesday afternoon? And so it was just a weird thing. And I kind of looked at them and I'm like, oh, they don't really seem all that happy, even though they've got this lifestyle. And so I met Grant Achatz, the chef, while dining at Trio. Went to a lunch there one afternoon that some friends set up, and it was a transformative experience. It was artistic, it was intellectual, it was thought-provoking. Most of all, it was emotional. And those are all things that I would never have associated with eating a dinner, right? And so from a perspective of great art experiences, like seeing a great movie or a great play or going to an amazing museum opening, we kept drawing back there. We kept going back, and we would go back so frequently that it was absurd because, it was a big meal and it wasn't cheap. And every time we'd go somewhere else, we'd go wow, why is no one else thinking this way? And as I got to know Grant a little bit, I think sometimes people bring, the chef some wine or beer or whatever, and it's that's kind of sand to the beach, I would bring him books. And I didn't figure he had a lot of time to read. So I would put a Post-it note on a page of an old book. So I remember I brought him this book called The Peregrinations of an Epicure.
Hold on a second. The Peregrinations, like a peregrine falcon? I don't even know what that word is. No.
A peregrination is a wandering about.
Okay.
So it was written just after World War II by an ex-serviceman. And he kind of goes around Paris, I want to say maybe late 40s, early 50s. I can't recall exactly. And there is a chapter in there on La Pyramide, which was a very classical restaurant, kind of the best in the world at the time. And he described a meal there in emotional terms that resonated with what Grant was doing, even though his technique, his cuisine, everything was completely different. And so I would literally just highlight a couple lines in there and give him this book, which was out of print at the time. And we kind of developed this email relationship back and forth where he would sort of try out some new food on us, and I would give, direct, honest feedback, but not like, oh, it was delicious. It was more like, like you're going for a provocation there, but if and we would go back and forth. And he wrote at the time on a forum called eGullet. And I went on there, and his spelling and grammar notwithstanding, I mean, it was like reading someone who's just really thinking hard about what they were doing. Everything we just talked about, here was this young 28-year-old chef from Michigan who looked like Captain America, who would come out he was like Hollywood in the sense of like he was good looking and very driven, very clean cut, but he didn't look like, the stereotype central casting of a chef. Right. Chubby, gregarious guy. He was really quiet, introspective, shy. But then you read these, which are still up, you can still Google it. And you'd go like, he'd go on for like 4 pages about bread service. Like, what's the point of bread? And this is a guy that I could wrap my head around. And so I remember on January 20th, 2004, it was my wife's birthday. And she said, yeah, I want to go back there. And we'd never been in the kitchen before. And they have a table there, but we'd never eaten in there. And I remember I emailed him and said, she's ethnically Latvian, speaks Japanese, and loves Thai food. Good fucking luck. And I knew exactly what that would do to him. That would put him into 10 days of pure hell. Because he would research Latvian food. He would have to redo a whole menu, 20 courses, right? And I didn't know they were going to put us in the kitchen. And they put us in the kitchen. I mean, it sounds like a jerky thing to do now, but we did have a relationship a little bit at the time. And he served us like the most amazing meal of my life, and it started out with Latvian sorrel soup with braised ham hocks. And, it had Flavors of the Sea, which was a Japanese dish. It had Thai dishes, but it was all in his style. And so it was his own, and yet it had elements of all these things. And at the end of that meal, he said to me, well, what do you think? And I had watched the kitchen, and it was like a watchmaker shop. It was not screaming and yelling. It is just as sorry to interrupt. It is so unlike anything that the vast majority of people listening to this would possibly expect, right? Yeah, it's not Gordon Ramsay. It's not Gordon Ramsay, right? Yeah,
it is just complete silence. It is like a watchmaking factory. It is really something else. Anyway, sorry to jump in.
Yeah, no. That's totally fine. And so at the end, I said, I doubt anybody anywhere in the world had a better meal tonight. And he was like, well, thank you. And I said, what are you planning on doing with yourself? I mean, I was like, I had a lot of wine, and I kind of looked at him. He sat down with us, and I said, what are you going to do? And he goes, well, what do you mean? I said, well, you're not going to be here forever. And he said, well, I want to build my own restaurant. And I said, I'd be happy to help you do that. And he said, well, what kind of restaurant do you want to build? I said, I don't know. I've never built a restaurant before. That was it. And then like a week later, I got an email with his business plan. I invited him by my house. And a year to the day later of that was May 4th. We went back and forth on email. May 4th, we held a dinner at my house for potential investors. And on May 4th, 2005, we opened Alinea.
That is nuts in terms of
completely nuts. We didn't even know each other.
Can you put that in perspective for people? I actually did not realize that was the time frame.
Yeah.
I mean, can you just in the context of like normal restaurant world?
I mean, we argued so we didn't really know each other very well, but he would come by my house and he didn't like.
Let me interject for a second, because you've said we didn't know each other very well. What did you know about each other, nonetheless, that gave you guys the push, like the impulse and the sufficient level of trust / excitement to actually pursue it, right? There had to be something there. It couldn't just be nothing. So what was it? You didn't know each other well, meaning maybe you didn't know the full scope of each other's backgrounds.
I actually studied that. Like that, I knew the facts, and I knew what he was putting in front of me. But I didn't know him, like the way you know someone that you're going to become a business partner with. And I think he just thought I was rich. I'm being serious. Like,
right.
I think everyone else wanted. This is really true because he has said this to me. Everyone else wanted to offer him a restaurant that they had already built or wanted to build, and I actually answered that question correctly. The I don't know is an awesome thing to say like 90% of the time of your life, right? And so when he said, what kind of restaurant do you want to build? I could have waxed on about some dream I had or just made some bullshit up at the time. But I just said, like, I have no idea. Like, that's a big question. We need to sort that out. And I think that was the right answer for him. I think that's all he needed to know was like, okay, the guy's got an open mind. He seems to have done well in business. He knows, apparently how to build something. What was really funny is that the stuff that I was concerned about, which was like architecture, design, plumbing, building, lease, all of that, he was like, the word oblivious is not too strong of a word. This is not a criticism of him either, right? It's just like he came to my house and he was just like, I want Martin to design everything. And Martin Kastner, who is a genius designer, has Crucial Detail, which we've been involved with for 15 years now. He's a designer. He's like an artisan. Like he built plateware and he won the Bocuse d'Or for the platter he designed for Thomas Keller and Daniel Balloud's team for the Team USA and all that now. But back then, this guy's not going to design plumbing or electrical. So I would just look at him going like, well, no, he can't. We need an architect and you need to get city stamps on all that. So I think Grant was just like, you find a place, you put tables in it and you build a kitchen and you go. In terms of like, obviously he knew there were health inspectors and all that, but the process of all this, just about, you either were going to not build it ever 8 weeks in because we would have hated each other, or we were the kind of people that figured everything out. And we just talked it out, like right down to like, what kind of tables, what kind of glassware, what kind of this, we wanted to rethink the why again of everything. Like, why do you put a candle on a table? Why is a candle romantic? Like, that's a question we asked. Why do we need candles? That's kind of like, why is that romantic? Why do people put a little bud vase on a table? Why shouldn't that be an edible thing? That'd be cool. So we did all of that, and we designed the experience to create emotional responses from the moment that you walked in the front door. So we didn't have the podium. We went, what does a good greeting feel like? Not just, if you're at someone's house, what does that feel like? If you're at a restaurant, what shouldn't it feel like? Well, it shouldn't feel like a computer in front of your face saying, what's your name, and all that. So we went through every aspect of that. And, I lost almost 20 pounds that year, not in a healthy way. Just like GCing the construction. I laid tile in the basement like 3 days before we opened.
Let me pause for 1 second. So the why question that comes to mind for me is after the finance, after battling it out on the front lines and going through 2001, why this as your next thing? Like, why was this the thing that captured your imagination? Because you had to know on some level once you started getting into the details, like, fuck, this is going to be...
Yeah, it's all in.
This is going to be this is going to be all my chips energetically. So why this?
There are occasional times when you wake up in the morning and like that thought comes back to you that like, hey, I'm really sucked into this, right? And for about 3 or 4 months, without telling anybody, even, Dagmara, like even not telling her, like telling no one, I kept going like, I should build a restaurant with this guy. like it would be the best restaurant in the world if it was done all the way, right? And I recognized my inner voice saying, that's a really dumb idea, and you don't know what you're doing. I'd never worked a day in my life in a restaurant, right? And I also recognized, and this is also critical, I recognized that so many people built their living room after they made some money. So they went like, oh, well, I know how to host a good dinner party. And I know good wine, so I'm going to build me a restaurant. And then they sit there like it's their living room. And that's not good. Like, I didn't want to be that doocy guy that built a restaurant because my ego was needed to host a party. And so whenever I would kind of later on broach that subject, and people would say like, well, I can almost hear their brain whispering, well, of course that's what he's going to do. and so that was, again, not the best of motivations in the world perhaps, but the honest one. That was hugely motivating eventually. But when we first started, it was this nagging thing. Like, I'd wake up in the morning and I would go, I'm not really into what I'm doing right now. And I've just met somebody who's the best in the world at what they do, and no one knows it yet. Like, and that's probably happened to me. I'm really fortunate that that's probably happened to me 7 or 8 times in my life. And when it happens and I meet that person, whoever it may be, no matter what they're doing, I pause, I kind of acknowledge that directly. And then I just go like, can we grab a glass of wine or coffee or something? And like, that's something worth marking and going like, wow, this person's really invested in something. And Grant had every aspect of being that at 28 years old. And it, in hindsight, like it looks smart, but I got to tell you, it was years before it felt smart.
You mentioned just now that you've met these people 7 or 8 times who are the best in the world. Or potentially the best
or
in the
among
world.
them, yeah.
Among them. But the key point that jumps out for me is, and the world didn't know it yet. So my question for you is that sort of brings to the forefront, in my mind at least, the question of what is Nick seeing or feeling that other people are not? So could you talk to that? I mean, is there a feeling or a particular type of observation, a particular type of detail that you notice in these people that allows you to scout the talent where other people might miss it or not pay enough attention to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've written a couple of books about that. It's definitely intangible. I think it's different in every case. But it's interesting because you can tell when someone is fully committed, I guess, to their craft or their art or their business or whatever it is that they're doing, their sport. And it's not because they talk about it all the time, though, of course, if you push a little, they're happy to do so. But it's more that, like, if you look around, like, the vast majority of people are not fully committed to whatever, And I think part of what you do is you try to steer people to find those things that they can commit to, or you can try to lower a barrier to show them like, hey, the commitment's not as hard as you think in this particular area, right?
Right.
But these folks are like, they're all in, they're 99% in, that's what they do, often to the detriment, frankly, of other aspects of their lives. And I guess you get better at noticing them, and I mean, now, like, that's like, boy, I live for that. Like, I love meeting people that, even if it's not something I'm interested in, mm-hmm. that are all in, know, and that's an interesting, I weirdly, I've never really thought about it that way, but like, it was just very clear to me that Grant was all in. Like, if here's the thing, if he wasn't going to do it with me, he was still going to do it.
Yeah.
I was a helper. Over time, I certainly contributed, a great deal to it. Not just he contributed a great deal to business, and then I also contributed to the art. But that took time, But I could tell that he was all in, and that was fun. I mean, it's fun to work with somebody who is basically like, okay, man, if you're not in, like, get out of the way because I'm still going.
Mm-hmm. And for anyone who has the opportunity, I don't even know if they would have the opportunity, but to observe Grant even for 60 seconds.
Well, Chef's Table on Netflix is a great.
Chef's Table.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Perfect. So everybody should have the experience of observing Grant working and focusing. It is, I've met a lot of people who are good at focusing, who have abnormal focusing abilities, and spending the time that we did together in Chicago and the time that I had to observe Grant is it is a next level of focus. It's really hard to encapsulate in words. So Chef's Table, fantastic. People should check it out and just watch the level of focus that permeates the appearance, the air, the atmosphere. It's really something else. So to that point, focus. One of my favorite aspects of speaking with you and having conversations is the questions that you raised, right? Like, what candle, not just should we have candles? Like, that's maybe a good question, but it's probably not the right first question. Like, why do restaurants use candles in the first place? Furthermore, why are candles considered romantic, right? Like, kind of stepping back.
Basic stuff. Yeah.
What are other questions that you asked related to Alinea, or you could certainly bridge to other, I think it makes sense to chat about Aviary as well. But what are some other questions that you guys asked that people might not think to ask?
Yeah, I mean, Grant set the tone for that in our first meeting, not really knowing me, and we started talking. We didn't even know where to start, right? And he said, "Well, I know one thing. I want to have wooden tables. Like, I want to have bare wood tables." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, why do fancy restaurants have white tablecloths? They literally call it a white tablecloth restaurant if it's fancy. Why?" And I came up with dumb answers like, oh, it feels good, or it absorbs like a spill, or whatever it may be. And he said, no, it's because the table underneath is a piece of shit. And he goes, and you know that. Like, as soon as you say it, everyone goes, oh yeah, I knew that. And you've been at weddings and stuff where you feel under the table and you're like, oh, it's plywood.
Right.
But if you go to like a really fancy restaurant, you feel under the table, guess what? Also plywood, just a little thicker. And he's like, when you rest your arms on the table, even if it doesn't come forefront in your mind, you kind of subconsciously know that they're kind of fooling you. And he's like, why can't we just have like black, beautiful tables? It'll show the food great. It'll show the plateware great. And then I kind of went like, well, yeah, but like, the health department doesn't let you put silverware right on the table. And if you put a glass there, the condensation will form a little ring, and then you have a wear issue. But you'll save $70,000 a year in laundering linens. And so we started going like, well, how do we solve the water problem? Well, you create a fridge that's just above the dew point, 44 degrees, in the winter, maybe a little warmer in the summer because it's higher humidity in Chicago, and you just get rid of ice. So you have these cascading decisions that like become part of the art of the place, that some of them start from like a really practical thing, like, hey, we want to have a quality table. And then all of a sudden you need a little pillow that the silverware goes on because that Martin designed, because we didn't want to have placemats. That's too cheap. So all of a sudden we had to design like, a silverware holder. So it just became this cascade of like interesting little art projects that were there for good reasons and really created a unique atmosphere. And it was like one of those things, like we never tested it until the day we opened. Like you couldn't test those things. And the very first guy through the door is now a famous Chef Sean Brock of Husk.
Oh, it's fantastic. Yeah.
So he was not yet a chef then, 2005. And he was the first guy through the door. And he wrote this giant blog post on eGullet with pictures and everything. You can go see it. And every single thing that we hoped would create an emotional, trigger, an emotional reaction, it's almost all there. Like I remember going home and seeing that the next day and going, wow, like that shit actually worked. And, and it's like right down to the front hallway that was, a reverse perspective, stolen from Chartres Cathedral and inverted, so all of my interest of architecture and art and science and all of Grant's, food and all that, like all came together in like a year-long conversation on how to do something. And we really fought with the architect and designers and all of that, because people would tell us the practical reasons why you needed to do this or that. And we would just go, nope, no host stand. Like, we wanted to greet people in an open way. And so just little things like that. And then we've taken that on, through everything that we've done where we took, 6 years to build our next place because we didn't have that idea that kept us up at night again. And so, when we did, then we did it. And I think editing yourself and each other is in an open way is really, really painful, but really, really important.
And coming back to something you mentioned related to the living room, the well-off,
yes,
who then create, say, an art project that is not, may be beautiful, but is most often not a viable business. How did you apply those questions and rethink the business model to make any of this work financially?
Yeah, well, I mean, you don't want to be a dilettante, right? And so, my biggest fear is that it would work in an artistic way, but wouldn't work as a business. And so, the answer is at the beginning, I didn't do much. I handled all of our marketing and PR. Like I wrote everything, myself. Really thought about open sourcing the building of the restaurant. You can still go online and see the original business plans and what logos we were considering using, and the test kitchen, which was in my house. We didn't tell anyone at the time, but that was my house at the time, and see the development of this restaurant. And I felt like the open source movement in that way was a good model for what we were trying to accomplish. And part of that was people would say, like, a restaurant like this can't make money. And, I wrote this little spreadsheet that I called the Universal Restaurant Calculator. And
can people find that online?
No. But it would be very unimpressive if they could. But it was basically like, how many covers per night? I mean, this is back of the envelope stuff. How many covers per night can you do? What's the check average for food? Check average for beverage? What are your food costs, beverage costs, labor costs? What's insurance cost? Your lease, your rent, like all those things, right? And I had enough experience with most of those things to at least give good estimates to it. And so what I started doing is I started modeling other restaurants using the Universal Restaurant Calculator. And I had, again, this goes to the transparency of data. I had real data for only 2 restaurants. And from those 2, I would then make assumptions about restaurants like the French Laundry, where Grant used to work, one of the greatest restaurants in the history of America, certainly. And, I came up with a number that Grant went, there's no way their revenue's that high or they make that much money. That's impossible. And it was really funny because years later, I now work with Chef Keller, and he's a friend all these years later. And I literally pulled that out one day with Grant, being there, and went like, how close am I on this back in 2005? And he's like, oh, you're within like 2 or 3%, and Grant was just like, and we're talking about back of the envelope stuff. And so, you asked, like, where can people start a business? Start on the back of an envelope. Like, one of my favorite exercises is to sit in a restaurant or a small business of some sort and just literally do the back of the envelope. That is the kind of calculation my dad called it the 2 shoebox method, put me through college, right? Like, money coming in one shoebox, money going out in the other. Whatever's left is profit, start that basic. And we did that. And I didn't really think about we did well, but we didn't make a ton of money. Alinea cost $2.2 million to build. I put up a little over a quarter of that myself and found investors for the rest, all of whom I knew. And, in the first year we did, we made about $450,000 to $500,000 on $4 or $5 million in sales. Not a great return, not a terrible return. We then won, Best Restaurant in America from Gourmet Magazine. And I was horrified that we won that, frankly. I remember Grant called me and said, yep, I just got a call from Ruth Reichel. And like, we had some stated goals of like, how would we know if this is a success? And one of the things we wrote down was Ruth Reichel declares it the best restaurant in America. And we wrote that because in 1997, she wrote, the most exciting place to eat in America is the French Laundry. And Grant was there and cooked that meal and said that the energy of having someone that he respected so much, because Ruth is just a great writer. She's one of the unimpeachable food critics in the history of America. And having her write that in the New York Times propelled that restaurant to its permanent status. I think that can't happen nowadays, honestly, for other reasons. But this is kind of pre internet, pre-Yelp, all that. And then all of a sudden we got that, and I was like horrified because one of the goals was completed so early. We wouldn't have our lodestar,
Mm-hmm.
And so he was like, "Dear God, can you let me enjoy it for like a minute?"
To you.
Yeah. He was genuinely mad at me. I was like, "That's terrible." I was happy, but I was also like, "Oh no, now what do we do? We need to find another artificial construct here to go after." And
enough of this. I need to find happiness and get this other happiness out of my face. Let me wait.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, it's about. I really do believe that actually. That it's often the process is so rewarding that when you get something done, it can be a letdown, And I wanted that process to go. And then, unfortunately, 6 months later, Grant was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and given 6 months to live. And so, weirdly, that was the moment where, after he was going through treatment, where I started going into the restaurant at night. Because remember, I'm not a service professional. I was running the business of the restaurant. I would start going in at night and asking really dumb questions again. And, weirdly, our goal was to keep Alinea open for when he came back. And mind you, he only missed 12 days, 14 days of service during really intense chemo and radiation. But he was given 6 months to live. And, when people are in that situation and their livelihood is tied to this restaurant, even despite their loyalties, oftentimes they just need to find another job because they're like, hey, in 4 months, this place is going to be closed. So it was, and in the midst of that, we decided to do our first book, really to chronicle, his what he had accomplished, because for him, he felt like that would be his legacy. He thought he was going to die. He was told he was going to die. So in the midst of managing a self-created, self-published book, and trying to do that differently, and then keeping a dwindling staff motivated, trying to let him know that it would still be there when he got well, all of that, I started going, this place is run in strange ways, man. This industry is not run right, And I started asking basic questions, like if we have a wait list for 100 people on a Wednesday, why do we do 74 people on a Wednesday but 86 on a Saturday? And the answer was because our incentives were misaligned. The service industry as a whole can't run at 100% every single day of the week unless they're incentivized to do so. And you could go well, yeah, but every server, they'll make an extra $100 a night or whatever. But they're kind of going look, if every night was Saturday, I'd be dead. It's really hard work, So you need to figure out ways of load balancing that and making every day the same, and you end up way ahead. So from a business perspective, that's when my sort of self-education in this industry came forward. And it came forward in a way that I think I was less patient with everything because we were also going through this really difficult emotional time. And so consequently, when I didn't get answers that made any sense, instead of being diplomatic about it, I would just be like, well, that's stupid. And which cut some of the normal social filter off. And I'm sure it wasn't a pleasant time to be around anybody. But I also think it was accepted within that environment at that time because everyone knew what we were going through. And so when we, years later, when we finally we're kind of hey, we've got some ideas to build next and the Aviary, that's when I kind of went well, we're going to do things totally differently here. And anyone who's not on board, even though they work for us, if you're not on board all the way in, on getting rid of normal reservations, on not using telephones, on doing all these things, I'm not, we don't have a place for you here. And man, it really worked. That was the basis of, I talked to every software company in the industry asking for their APIs, asking to build essentially what's options pricing software on top of reservation systems. And OpenTable told me no, and the POS systems told me no. I called theaters and went like, what ticketing system do you use? And all of those told me no. And so I hired a single programmer, and he and I in 6 weeks built a really rudimentary booking system. But the first day we turned it on, we sold $562,000 of tickets to a restaurant for the first time, ever.
Okay, so pause here for a
I know
second.
we're way ahead.
No, this is great.
Right.
This is great. So a few things for folks who are not familiar. API application programming interface. It's how you can effectively link into someone else's software. POS, point of sale, not piece of shit. And,
but it is a piece of shit.
it may also be a piece of shit.
Yes.
What were the design specs that you were looking for? In other words, before you get to the 500,000 plus, the snap of the fingers, like what were you trying to fix, or what were you trying to create?
So I get a lot of grief for saying this in the industry and in the press, but basically, whenever you make a restaurant reservation, one of the two of you talking is lying to each other. If you think about it, no other industry, form of entertainment, which dining out is a form of entertainment. I know it's sustenance. I know there's so much culture embedded in it and all that, but you could eat at home, right? No other form of entertainment. You just call them up and say, hey, hold a seat to the Bears game or the Cubs game or the opera, and I'll show up around 7:30. And then they tell you, yeah, we'll have a seat ready for you at 7:30. And then when you get there, they go, oh, you know what? Go wait over there for 30 or 40 minutes because we're running a little behind tonight, you know? The reason that they're running behind is because they overbooked, because about 15 to 18% of the people just don't show up. So they overbook. They also know that if they tell you that they'll really seat you at 9 and you wanted an 8:15, you'll just go to the restaurant down the street from them that will lie to them. Right?
Right.
So they do that, and ultimately it's just bad all around. It's bad for the restaurant. It's wasteful for food, and it's bad hospitality. And that's there are so many pop culture references and entire sitcom episodes built around someone trying to get into a restaurant. Right? It's absurd. It's completely absurd. And I looked at our no-show rate at Alinea, data-driven, tracked it. I looked at our what we call short-seated tables, like the number of tables that were 4 people but only 2 showed up. And the dirty secret there is people would go well, what do you have available? Well, I have an 8:30 for 4. Okay, we'll take that. And they never intended to bring the other 2 people. Well, that's just as bad as a 2-top no-showing. We only have 74 people in there. And so it's a yield management, or 74 seats. So it's a yield management problem. And so 5 to 8% of our revenue every night was being lost to that transaction. That was a non-transaction, right? And so I wanted to figure out ways to do 2 things. One, I wanted to figure out ways to make it transactional. Because, again, you asked about Professor Thaler. One of the key tenets is a little bit of skin in the game, right? Mm-hmm. When people have a small vested interest in something, in the outcome of something, or even if I gave you a pencil as a gift, and then 30 minutes later I want to take it back, you will get so mad even though you didn't care about that pencil.
Right.
Right? Because you're like, what was that?
Yeah.
Dude gave me a gift. Now he's pulling it back. You know?
It's like the expected value of a mug. If you ask them how much they would spend to buy the mug versus giving them the mug and saying how much will you accept to sell it, the differential.
Correct. Yes, huge. So, that came to me one day because my kids wanted to go see a movie at night that I did not want to go see. And I was really, really I would have easily paid $50 to not go to this movie. Right? Yeah. And then my wife basically says, hey, well, let's go to that movie. So I go on Fandango. I buy 4 tickets, $60, whatever it was. And at 5:30 at night, it's pouring rain, and everyone's napping. And they're like, yeah, I don't want to go. And I'm like, get your asses in the car. We're going to the movie, man. Now, I would have easily paid that $60 to not go to the movie. But once I had the sunk cost of paying for the movie, my psychology totally flipped. and I was like, we're going to this movie that I don't want to go to. And I literally irrationally made everyone go to the movie. Like, which weirdly cost, I mean, from an emotional family standpoint, all bad all the way around, right? And so I thought about it, and I was like, wow, what if people put down a small deposit on times when demand exceeds supply? Like, right? So Saturday night, 8:00, great. That's the best seats at the Opera House. Let's see if people prepay for that or put down $20 for it. That's fully credited at the end of their meal. It's not a cover charge. I'm not trying to squeeze people on the actual cost of the meal. I'm just trying to go like, yeah, let's see if people make a commitment. And everybody told me, no one's going to do that. Like, this is not the way it works. But if you look back historically, and this is the interesting part, again, it's about like digging in deep on something. If you look back historically, restaurant reservations started with the telephone. And at the time that we were starting to do this, the telephone was dying. And I didn't know that at the time. That was 8 years ago. But I have a computer in my pocket, and if you ring me and I don't know your number, I don't want to talk to you. I don't answer it. I'd much rather receive like a little piece of text letting me know what's going on than a phone call. Similarly, like calling a restaurant is an antiquated thing to do at this point. But long before the telephone, people got room and board. And what room and board was literally, it was like you go to an inn and you get a room for the night, and then do you need food? Okay, well, you get a board of food. That was literally it. And you'd prepay for it. Mm-hmm. And so, there was hundreds of years of that long before there was a telephone and people called and said, yep, like, I'd like to eat at your restaurant. Sure, we'll let you in. And so as the technology for the telephone has morphed into, what we all have in our pockets now, I just wanted to update that whole transaction. And so I also wanted to acknowledge that Tuesday nights should be cheaper than a Saturday night. So it has to work in both ways. I always thought Uber could have fixed their surge pricing issues by having discounted pricing when there was no demand. Like just move pricing in two directions. And if you move pricing in two directions, then like that whole argument goes away.
Right.
And so we did that. We priced out different prices by day of the week and times a day. So 5 p.m. on Wednesday at Alinea is still cheaper than 8 p.m. on a Saturday by a lot, by $80 to $100 a person.
Wow.
And you know what happens? And this is now we have, hundreds of restaurants doing this on our software called Tock. What happens is people buy the most expensive seats first and the cheapest seats first, which is exactly what you'd expect, actually.
Right.
Because there's some people who are price conscious and go like, wow, this is a really expensive meal, but holy cow, I don't really care if I eat at 5:00 on a Tuesday. Great. Like I can save $400. And then there's some people that go like, I only eat at 8 p.m. on Saturday. Well, okay, that's fine. Pay a little more.
Or they're attracted to the fact that it is the most expensive.
Sure, that happens too. And then there's a whole bunch of tools that over time we built on top of that to sell wine pairings or sell books. We sell 20 Alinea books a day on checkout with the booking process. Mm-hmm. That's a ton because we're not going to exit through the gift shop at Alinea. It's a Michelin 3-star restaurant. so like we would subtly have like one book like near the restrooms that people could peruse, but it didn't say like buy the book or anything like that. So typically we'd sell like 1 or 2 per night. Now on checkout, when you book Alinea, it says, hey, would you like to buy an Alinea book personalized? And 20 people a night get it. That is $400,000 in revenue a year.
Yeah, that's incredible.
It's crazy, right? And it's amazing to me that no one did that beforehand because ultimately people can't buy what they don't see, and people don't want to be upsold inside of a restaurant. There's nothing worse in my mind than, some places that today's special is today's special and it's real and you kind of know that, but sometimes it's just the old fish.
Right. Sunday night.
Yeah, right. And we all know these things. And like, I think no restaurant wants to like raise their hand and go, yep, that's all true. Like we were lying to our customers and we're not going to really seat you at 8:15. And so I think when I said that, like you can look back through some articles. I remember that there's an article, I think it was in GQ, that they interviewed like a grizzled veteran, and he didn't use his name, and said, overbook in a bar to wait in has always worked for me. And I was just like, how does that not sound like terrible hospitality to everyone reading that?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. There's so many systems that have similar overbooking, load balancing issues, right? You look at airlines, you look at hospitality.
My dentist.
Yeah.
I have a great dentist. They only do it via phone call or email. And so I have to play a guessing game. It's like going into a clothing store and going like, yeah, I'm looking for a blue V-neck cashmere sweater. They're like, nah, don't have one. Guess again. It's like, put the shit on display, man. Like, just tell me what day you could clean my teeth. Show me, and I'll just go online and hit the button.
So when you then debuted the ticketing option, if I'm labeling it properly, how did you prime the pump for that? Was there anything? Did you need to prime the pump to have this? What seems like certainly a windfall.
Well, we did. Yeah, we did a video where Next Restaurant was about a restaurant that's always new. Essentially, like what's one of the big problems of the restaurant industry? Well, when you open a new restaurant, doesn't matter what it is, people are going to show up for like 5 or 6 months, and then after that, you guys struggle to like get regulars and like find new audiences and all that. But people like the new, quote unquote, right? The other problem is that our own staff and chefs were the kind of people who I said to Grant one time, he cooked this amazing French dish for me at Alinea right in the middle of his sickness because I had driven down from Michigan. I've never eaten before or after in the Alinea kitchen, but he whipped up this little French dish for me of duck. And I was like, man, let's open a French restaurant someday. And he went like, we'll get bored after 6 months. And then I was at one of our chefs' homes on a day off Tuesday, and he loves Thai food, and he made this amazing Thai meal, amazing. And I was like, wow, like I had no idea these guys were so versatile, And then it made sense. Hey, these are passionate, amazingly talented people. And it kind of dawned on me, like, let's just change the restaurant every 4 months. Like, let's do. And then we dwelled on that for like a year, thinking like it was kind of impossible to do. And then, Grant I said, well, like, let's start with a French menu. He's like, well, what does that mean? Like, there's Southern France, there's Loire Valley, there's France, that's the Nouvelle cuisine. And then there's France from like, 100 years ago, totally different. And I was like, yep, Paris 1906. I don't need to explain to you what that is. You'd want to eat that. If I just said, like, if someone said, hey, new restaurant opening, what's the menu? It's Paris 1906. I'd go like, cool. Like, I want to do a little time travel and see what that was like. And so as soon as we had like a city and a time, we instantly knew that was the idea that kept us up at night, where we went like, wow, look at all these different places we can travel. And what does that restaurant look like? And how do you create a kitchen versatile enough to make all these different cuisines? And how do you make it not feel like Disneyland, where one time you have a theme of Paris and the next time you have a theme of Japan? So you have to go with like an austere minimalism, And
is there a particular reason why you chose the year 1906?
Doing some research, and I may get the exact date wrong because this is 8 years ago I did the research, but I believe the Seine flooded in 1908, somewhere around there. And so Escoffier, like the father of French cuisine, was at the Ritz then. And that was kind of like the height of that era of cuisine. And then after the Seine flooded, that's where you got sort of your brasseries and bistros, because they had to kind of go to a more casual. It opened up for more people. It took the price point down. It made it more approachable, and it wiped out dozens of these fancy restaurants. And so like rent got cheap, and all of a sudden like, hey, like we're going to get this new style of restaurant. That's roughly as I recall it. Somebody's going to listen to this and tell me I'm all wrong, but that's where we landed because we could do this Escoffier menu. Mm-hmm. And boy, we argued about that too. Like they didn't have blenders then. So like electric blenders. So, I mean, we did like a
So you wanted to mimic the production?
Well, I did. Grant did not. So we were, I remember we invited the press to a practice dinner.
Grant's like, hey pal, you don't have to make the food.
Well, partly that, but partly he was like, should we make it intentionally worse than we can?
Yeah.
Because the recipes were really vague. They didn't even call for salt.
Yeah.
So in the middle of this press dinner where we had like the New York Times there, we had all sorts of these people there, which I'll never do again. Right. That was just a genuine error. And we were still arguing out conceptually what this thing would be. And then we served dinner and we were like openly like he'd come out of the kitchen and we would openly argue about it, you know? And
this is at the press dinner?
Yeah. and I remember he brought the soup out and it was like, you know, he was like, I was like, oh, they must have used like the actual blenders, right? Like modern blenders. Cause it was like the mouthfeel was like perfect. Right. And so I was like, oh, you use the blenders, you know? And he was like, the recipe didn't call for salt either, did it? But should I have not used that and had it taste like shit? You know? and then I was like, well, maybe you don't know that they didn't have refrigeration then either. And they packed the vegetables in salt as a desiccant. And so they were almost all pre-salted by the time they get to Paris. And that was it. Like people were just like, these guys don't like each other at all. but that's our method. Like that's what we did, you know? And I mean, to the day we opened, we had those arguments. And then, you know, in terms of the software, like, man, like I didn't sleep for a week. We set it up on Rackspace. It didn't work right. I had never done anything like that before. You know, it was like no one would help. I think like you know, nobody would help. No one.
When you say nobody would help, you mean competitors, potential? I don't even
potential
know
allies, potential like
these
potential
are people.
software companies.
I got it. It's people, why wouldn't they help?
You know, like in the case of OpenTable, they had a monopoly.
Right.
So why
that makes sense to me. That makes sense.
In terms of everyone else, I think they just didn't get it. But even people within my own company thought this was a fool's errand. You know, like Grant, for sure, like he will fully admit this now, thought it was a terrible idea.
Why did he think it was a terrible idea?
Because it's not hospitable. Mm-hmm. It's not hospitality.
It's low touch, not high touch.
Correct. Mm-hmm. And hugely the case where, you know, all of a sudden the price is different every day. Like, are people going to get that? And I just kept looking to other industries and I'm like, no one has a problem with it when they go to a baseball game. They're not sitting on the, above the dugout. And then like the guy who's in the third deck back row looks down and go, oh, that guy, like he totally stole that ticket from me. Like they're like two different price points, you know?
Yeah.
And I just feel like people inherently get that without having to explain it to them.
If I may, how far in advance of the opening were you hoping to launch the software, and when did you end up launching the software?
Yeah, I launched it about 7 hours before the first dinner.
Holy shit!
I hope to have done it 4 to 5 weeks ahead of that. It was literally a one-man operation plus me, like one programmer and me. When we launched it, Rackspace, this is 2010. I'm not saying anything bad about Rackspace. I probably set it up wrong. 2010, it did not, like, it's supposed to auto load correct and self-propagate, and it neither happened. I was expecting, we had 17,000 people on our email list that had signed up on the website to like be notified when the bookings went on sale. And I was expecting maybe, 700 show up, like should be fine. And something like 8,000 or 9,000 showed up, and everyone just kept hitting the refresh key. Here's another fatal error of stupidity. And this is not the way our software is built now because we have professionals here. But basically, my admin login was on the very same server as everybody's public access.
Oh, God.
So I couldn't even go into configure it up. So and the good news on this is that I couldn't answer like hundreds of angry emails all at once. So I created a Facebook group for the business, which in 2010, not very many people did. And so if you go back and scroll all the way down to the beginning of that, you'll see me going like, hey, if everyone could please stop refreshing, I can sort this out. And what was really cool is that people felt part of something. Mm-hmm. They felt like, wow, holy shit, this guy is actually doing this himself. We're part of this experiment. And we're on the inside of it. I got a lot of empathy from the customers, even though they were the ones that were unable to get what they wanted. And then when it finally started working, I mean, I literally not showered in 5 days. I had pizza boxes laying around. It looked like a bad movie startup thing. I had a beard, like I was, just strung out manic. And I remember I called Grant and it was opening day. And he said, "How many should I prep for?" And I said, "Prep for full, like, because if not, we'll turn on the phones." What I didn't tell him was that I didn't order the phones because I didn't want to have a fail-safe.
You'd burn the ships. Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure I forced myself to work. So we had no phone line. And when it started working, I would double click. One of the functions was I could double click on a table, and if it was yellow, it was held. The public couldn't see it. I could make it available by double clicking it. It would turn green, and then when it was sold, it would turn red. But the first time I did that, to let more inventory out, and clearly things were working, it turned red so fast I thought it was broken. And so then I went into the credit card processing and saw, oh my gosh, someone bought that fast. And I called Grant and I said, "Dude, you got to come to my house." And he was like, "We're opening a restaurant in like 6 hours. What's going on?" I said, "As the guy who helped save your life, get in a fucking taxi and come over here because I need to show you something." And he looked at me and kind of went like, "What is wrong with you?" Right. And I took him upstairs to my office and I explained to him what I just explained to you. And I said, "Click on one of those and make it available." And he said, "Which one?" I go, "Any one in the next month." And he clicked like 3 weeks out at 9:30 and it instantly turned red. And in another window, I had the credit card thing up and I go, "Look, Mr. Jones bought that." And he went, "Really?" And I'm like, "Yep, there are, 4,000 people waiting for you to do that right now." And that was the moment at which I was basically like, this is the best thing I've ever built. because it was functionally different than any way that anybody was doing this. It wasn't novel. It was just applied in a novel way. And so, what was interesting is that, of course, the software itself sucked. But as a proof of concept, it was awesome. Yeah,
quick question on that, if you're comfortable answering. How much money had you put into developing the software at that point? Roughly.
I'm going to say $115,000.
Yeah.
Roughly.
Okay. So in your mind, were you completely confident it would work, it doesn't have to be A or B, there could be C, D, E, F, or were you like, for $115K or whatever it might be, even if you budgeted for less and it overran, even if there is a 20% chance that this works, it is worth risking the hours and time because it will so completely transform what we're doing. And if it fucking fails, who cares?
Correct. Yeah. The latter one. Yeah. Again, it's about the asymmetric risk, right? And it was also about this thing that as I dug into how Alinea ran, there's like things that you can fix and control and there's things you can't, right? And this was the one that, I would answer phones at Alinea and it was like being a therapist. People would go like, "I would like to, make a reservation on my anniversary, 7 weeks from now on a Thursday." And you're like, "I'm really sorry, sir. It's totally full." And 100% of the time they thought you were lying to them.
Right.
and so consequently, like, I realized that we were saying no to people more than we were saying yes. And that even when we said no in a nice way and took 10 minutes to do so, people thought that we were lying or that they weren't important to us or any of those things. And so I felt that transparency was actually more important than the actual money and the actual yield management. I felt like allowing people to see the entirety of the inventory was the most important thing. And I had this same thing with the trading markets. They've moved to more and more and more transparency, more and more speed. This is true across every industry. And I just felt like, wow, this industry I found myself in was so backwards. And so I just wanted to make the whole thing more transparent. And so even if it didn't go beyond my own restaurants, I was totally fine with that. In fact, I didn't do anything with it for 4 years. And I didn't really intend on making it, like a software product. I intended on fixing my own problems. And I think often that's where good ideas come from.
Oh, super often. Yeah, the scratching of your own itch. At least you have a market of one.
Yes.
Guaranteed market of one. And I also want to point out, when we were talking about asymmetric risk earlier, and you're like, well, I want to stand to make 3 to 4x what I stand to lose. And if you run the math, and I'm sure I'm missing a lot of subtleties here, but when you said we booked 500x $1,000 and it cost 115, like we're getting very much within the ballpark of that.
Yeah, but I didn't even since then it's like we've taken our margins at our restaurants from 10 to 12% to, at times in good months, 20 to 25%. In an industry that over the last 5 years, if you read, I give a talk called Tuesday is Not Saturday and 7 Things You Already Know But Are Doing Nothing About. It's a talk that I give to the restaurant industry. And, one of the things that I point out in there is that, there's so many obvious things that you could be doing to improve your hospitality, to improve your booking process, to get rid of food waste. But people tend to just kind of move along because it's a really chaotic environment. It's hard to make change in it because every day is game day. Like you wake up every day and 100 people are going to come through the door. And if your fishmonger doesn't show up, well, you need to figure out what to do with that, And so it's not really about the return on that one investment at that one moment. It's more like, 1,000 small improvements over time. And, if I look back at that system that I built then compared to what we have now, it's a minuscule part of what it turned into. But it was the seed of an idea, which is more important, which is, hey, let's shake things up. And then I got a great CFO who was at Bain Consulting, and he came on to help manage the building of the project of Next. And when he started wanting to build out a business team, I was like, great, run with it. And so we've built out food cost analysis that uses Marimekko charts, and it's totally different because it's visual, and you give that to the chefs.
It uses what charts?
Marimekko. If you don't know Marimekko, if you get nothing out of this, one of the greatest visualizations in charts that you could do in Excel or whatever. Hard to do vocally, but imagine a square where each of your x-axis is the percentage of, let's say, food costs, and then each square within there is meat or produce, but the whole of the square is 100%. The y-axis is 100% of one metric, and the x-axis is 100% of another. So you could kind of look at any given square and see how much that impacts the whole. It becomes like a big Lego building with different colors. If you give a busy chef 400 receipts and say, hey, every Friday look through all these and, figure out what we're spending too much on, or worse, hey, your food costs last month were 36%. I need them at 32%. You can't take percentages to the bank. Let's talk about dollars. Let's see where we can save some dollars. Or the revenue could have just gone down that month for whatever reason. It's August in New York. And so it's not really a good way to look at it. But you give this person this chart, this Marimekko.
No, Marimekko, I'm looking.
Guy's name. Yeah,
it's Marimekko chart. Is that right?
Again, not good on spelling, but sure.
I think so. There is a Google result, which is how to make a Marimekko chart in Excel. So I'm guessing that's probably it. There's some YouTube videos as well. So I'll put those in the show notes for people.
Man, I got to tell you, from a utility perspective, you show that to a person, you explain it visually, when you see it, it makes much more sense. And they instantly get it. And they look at it and they're like, oh, there's no way I spent that much on fish last month.
And this can be used for things outside.
Everything.
Okay.
Everything. Yeah. It's
not just food, not just restaurants.
Oh, no. It's just a great visualization of utility. And consultants love it. And I got to tell you, I don't love consultants in general. but if I've learned anything from the best consultant that I've ever hired, who is now my partner and CFO, he came up with this. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, how did this not enter my life until my 40th year? This makes no sense, It's just incredibly useful. But my point is that we kind of went through everything in the restaurant and went well, what are the biggest spending areas that we can analyze? And it's true in any endeavor that you're doing. There's no point in looking at the dimes if you've got something that costs $1,000. Start there. So, and that's, getting into our thoughts on our publicity, our PR, like we don't have a professional PR person and haven't in 14 and a half years. We don't spend money on any promotions other than social media. And then with the social media, we track all of that. We can see what our ROI is on a boosted post. We can see what our ROI is if we advertise on your podcast.
Right.
That's why these mediums are working, is because they're measurable.
Mm-hmm. I was looking up just as you were chatting, and as I was also looking for Marimekko, a quote that I think applies, and you may certainly feel free to disagree, but applies very well to a lot of the breakthroughs that you have experienced and also helped to catalyze in a lot of what you've done. And it's a quote from Charlie Munger, who, for those who don't know, you should definitely take a look at Poor Charlie's Almanac. He's the right hand, or I shouldn't even say that. He is the investing partner of Warren Buffett, and fascinating human being. But one of the quotes of his that I really return to a lot when I think I might be outsmarting myself in some way, or in general as a reminder, is, quote, "It is remarkable how much long-term advantage people like us have gotten by trying to be consistently not stupid instead of trying to be very intelligent."
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean,
because you, as you noted earlier, you have these practices that are being implemented by otherwise, in many cases, smart people who have just not taken the time to ask, why are we doing this? Why does this exist as a thing? Why does, like you pointed out, it's so obvious once you reframe it. Like you walk into a clothing store and they're like, okay, what are you looking for? Nope, sorry, guess again. It's like, that's fucking ridiculous, right? And yet that's exactly the way it works in many other places. Yeah.
And that's, once you start down that road of thinking that way, it will drive you a little nutty because you start, like, you can't do every business, and, there's a couple things that I've got in my back pocket that I'm kind of like, one day I'm going to arbitrage truffles because it's like, there's an opaque market that's absurd. Like, it's like, here's an example. I'm going to give somebody out there, call me up because this is a real business idea. And I've been wanting to do it for years, but black and white truffles, not the chocolate ones, but the kind that the dogs dig up in France and Italy, are as expensive as the most expensive drugs in the world. You order them as if it were an illegal drug. Of course, they're perfectly legal, but you call up a truffle dealer, and you go like, what do they cost? Well, they're, $650 a pound right now for black truffles, $1,600 for white. You try to talk them down a little bit. You make sure that you get the best quality because, hey, we're Alinea and we will ship you back the stuff we don't like and all that. And then in an unmarked box stacked with newspaper will come $20,000 of truffles. Good for like a week, by the way. This is not like a big supply. And it is completely opaque as a market. There's no mycologist touching these. There are knockoffs not knockoffs. There's different species and quality from Australia, from Tennessee, from China, et cetera, that they cut into it. Sound familiar? And like, it was we spend a lot of money on truffles every year, and try to figure out what the U.S. market in the fall truffle season is worth. You can't. It's exactly like publishing. You can't find numbers, And so whenever I see something like that, I'm like, someone's guarding their golden goose,
Right. Whenever it's a black box, you're like, I feel like I am not on the best side of this trade.
That's right. Right. And that's what I did. I did a closed-end seller network between the Merc and the Amex to arbitrage ETFs to get rid of the phone brokers in the middle. That took me like a year and a half to get through the Merc and Amex powers that be. Read like most of the CFTC. So when they would tell me it's not like in the rules or not legal or whatever.
What is the CFTC, Chicago Trade
No.
Commission?
This is the Federal Commodities Trading Commission.
I see. Okay.
It's like the SEC, but for commodities.
I gotcha.
And, again, sit down and actually read that someday. Like, what's amazing is that the experts never – it's like the members of Congress who don't read the bill. And then if you ask them detailed instructions on it, they're like, oh, yeah, I don't really know. But the general tenor is this or that. The people who were governing the exchanges had never read the rules. So they would just quote to me. They would just quote to me like, well, it's against the rules. And I'd be like, well, here are the 7 volumes. Please show me where. If not, I'm going to do it, And so similarly, like truffles, same thing. The booking for the restaurants, same thing. Open Table had a monopoly. They wouldn't tell you who your customers were. They would sell your customers. They still do to other restaurants. If you're full one night, they'll just send you down the street to a Japanese restaurant down the street. They don't care. So I wanted to get rid of all that. So I built the software for that. Truffles, I will someday build a truffle exchange.
So, question for you:
Yeah.
This is something also for. This is maybe just turning this into a therapy session / coaching session for myself. But I get attracted like a moth to the flame to puzzles. And
I've got a puzzle for you.
No, I don't need any more puzzles. I need no more puzzles. But there are many black boxes out there, right? You have truffles, and like you said, it's like, all right, what's the market size of the truffle exchange at X point in time? Don't know, right? Although you guys, as one establishment or multiple establishments, buy a lot, there might be 100 different black boxes like that you run into. How do you choose the black boxes worth trying to shine light on like a detective? Because it's going to consume energy, it's going to consume time. How do you pick and choose which to go after?
It's like the manic test, right? Like it's like the one that bothers me the most. Like I kind of start doing, and then it's iterative from there. Like sometimes you find yourself in a construction of your own doing that was accidental. Mm-hmm. Like all of a sudden, you kind of opened your mouth and said something like the truffle thing, and all of a sudden, like, well, okay, I guess we're building a truffle exchange. I feel like the boring company is like that for Musk. Like he opened his mouth and be like, yeah, just dig big tunnels, and he's got enough credibility now where some engineers went like, yeah, we could dig tunnels that are seismically fine, and like, hey, you work for SpaceX, okay, like let's see if you can dig a tunnel. I don't think that was like a business plan,
right?
And he just has a lot of credibility, at this point. I think that to a certain extent, like a lot of people have a lot of ideas, they just don't dig down that rabbit hole, and so I do some as like a hobby. I do some where I kind of have someone that I like within our company and say, well, if you really wanted to be independent and do something cool, like here's a project, like learn more about this and start researching it. We have, 300 and some employees on the restaurant side and about 50 on Tock. Many of them are incredibly hardworking and intelligent. And when someone says, hey, I want to learn how to be more entrepreneurial, I take one of my black boxes out and say, well, let's see if that's true. Because this is going to take you 6 months of independent work without any guidance, and you're going to get tired of it really fast. Or you're going to come back to me and say, hey, you know what? Like, I can't figure out the total value of the truffle market in the United States. And I'm like, yeah, no shit. That's why I asked you to do it.
Now, when you give them an assignment like this, they're like, you know what, boss, I really want to be an entrepreneur. You're like, congratulations. I'm now giving you a project, and it's on your time and you're not getting paid for it. Or do you?
Oh, no, it's not. Oh, no. I never take every single intern that works at our restaurants for a minute is paid.
Gotcha. So even
so
they do get paid for the black box time.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. I would never I think one of the things that I really dislike actually are industries like where they say, hey, like you're in college or whatever, be an intern. And then, your parents say, yeah, that's a great opportunity for you to learn something and all that. And it's like, well, you're probably not, if you're not getting paid, you're not being valued, frankly. And for me, we pay everybody. I don't, nobody who's working here, if they're, I do expect that, salaried people are going to work more than just the time here. And I think that people who are passionately curious will be given a problem like that and will come up with interesting solutions to finding out what the answer may be. And that's enough, you know?
Mm-hmm. So I want to add some sort of commentary on the question that I asked, which is, I think it's incredible that you do pay them for that independent research, which is also acting as entrepreneurial training / filtering for them. But I wouldn't have judged you harshly at all if you said, no, that's on their own time. And the reason I say that is that if you are going to be investigating black boxes as an entrepreneur, there are going to be periods of time where you are doing it in the evenings. You are doing it on the weekends. You are doing it without a clear road to immediate cash flow, right? So I wouldn't have judged you if you said, you know what, I am paying them full time for their normal job, but if they want to tackle one of these black boxes, that's considered extracurricular time. So I wouldn't have judged you harshly if you had responded in the negative on that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you know, to back up a little bit, like when there are people who I don't know who do not work for our company and they call me up and say, hey, I've got this idea for XYZ or whatever, and it's intriguing enough, I will pose some more difficult questions, but they're not working for me. You know what I mean? Like
right.
There's a guy who brought me a food product that I you know, about a year ago, and it was interesting, but not super compelling. And I said, hey, if you did these 5 things, it would be a lot more compelling for me to be involved and to help with it and all of that. And yesterday I got a box in the mail, and he had done not only the 5 things I said, but said, hey, when I started doing those, these 7 other things popped up. Here's where the product is. Here's the people we signed. Here's the airline we just signed to carry the product. And I would love to have you still involved, even though we're so much farther down the road than I thought it'd be a year later. That's super cool. Like, yeah, I didn't pay that guy, obviously, but there's a person who's truly entrepreneurial, right, and did this on his own time. But if they're working here, if they work for the Alinea Group, if they work for Tock, like for sure, they're, you know, you could take time during your day, like doing your normal business. That's a project that we're working on. And, you know, we also try not to have such harshly defined roles, not within the restaurant. Like, look, if you're a server, if you're a captain, if you're a line cook, you're probably not working on my truffle project. You know? Just because, like, it's you don't have. I mean, realistically, you know, that's. But on the business side, we certainly have people who work in roles as like a lawyer or an analyst or something like that, who want to get involved with our publishing project or who want to get involved with the truffle project or whatever it may be. And, you know, I'm happy to pull them in and try to include them. And, you know, like you said, you used a word as an entrepreneurial filter. I would say 95% of the time people filter themselves out.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, they're going to self-select or self-select out.
Yeah.
Are there any particular books or resources that you have found useful on hiring or managing?
God, if you found one, let me know. No, hiring is so hard. I think it's the hardest of all things to do. And I think my style of interviewing people is totally different than it was 20 years ago. We used the word self-selecting just a moment ago, and it's exactly what I do. I kind of bring people in. I let them know what I'm about, what the company is about. They've probably already been interviewed by other people before they get to me. And so at that point, I let them know, like, what are the upsides and downsides of working here, you know? And I kind of let them know what the expectations are. And then I tell them, like, people self-select into a job. And you don't want to come here if you're going to fail, because that would be terrible. And I don't want you to come here and fail, because that would be a waste of my time and resources and would also feel awful. It's never good to let go of someone. It feels terrible. So let's see if you are self-selecting in. What do you want to know? Like, I'll be completely transparent about what's good, what's bad, what's good about working for me personally, the fact that maybe you'll never see me again. You know, I mean, it's like a big enough organization where, you know, there are definitely people working here who I don't know at all. But people tend to join organizations where they want to work. And so I try to make that process, I try to make them be able to say no easier than they can say yes. What
would be some examples of how you do that?
You know, I kind of judge the person by what their pain points are. And so if someone says like, one of the things I like to ask, which it kind of resonates probably with you, is I say, hey, what are the last 5 books you read? And I got to tell you, that's a really hard question to answer. Because even if you're a voracious reader, it's really like you remember like a book from 2 years ago, but you can't remember the one you read 2 months ago sometimes.
Totally.
At least I can't, And so that is a great filter on people because a couple of things will happen. One, the person who's a voracious reader will go like, oh my God, I swear to God, I read like 20 books this year. Let's see. And they will really start going, oh, well, I read one like 3 months ago. That was this and it was about that. And you could tell that they're intellectually curious and read a lot. You'll also get a person who goes, look, I haven't read a book in 20 years, but every night I go home and I do woodworking. And that's my outlet. Like, that's where I focus. That's my Zen moment. And that's a valid answer to that question, too. Like, you don't have to be a reader. Some people will just lie through their teeth. And they'll answer what they think is the smart answer to that question. And I don't want that person there.
I read War and Peace, and then I went to the problems of philosophy. And
Yes. Right. And then the 4-hour work week. Right. So
definitely not the right answer.
right. So there's that. And I asked that kind of question. But then like things like, do you enjoy writing? Like one of my things is like, if someone doesn't like to write, when people ask what I do for a living, I say, I'm a writer. And they go like, oh, you've written a couple books. And I go, no, I write about 400 emails a day. And that skill is hugely important right now. If someone doesn't like to write, they're not going to want to work for me, because when they send out an email and I'm CC'd on it and it isn't a well thought out little thing, the answer coming back is like, hey, here's 4 ways to improve this. And at some point it'll be like, really? You did that same mistake again? Like, it comes off kind of harsh in email, And so if you're the kind of person that doesn't take feedback well or doesn't want to learn, like, man, I am lacking patience for that at this point in my life. And I let them know that. And some people like look at you and just go like, yeah, dude, I don't want to work there. Like, more than I would think, which is great.
Yeah, simplifies matters.
Yeah. And it's done with a smile. I'm not like trying to like terrorize people when they come in an interview. And then there's some people that go like, awesome, that's exactly what I want. And, we have everything from like, double PhD engineers to people who've never, attended a university for a minute. And but they've self-selected into an organization that people ask a lot of questions. I love that, like, I can be in a room and come up with an idea and everyone there will just be like, well, that's a great idea. There's no way we're going to be able to do that in the next 6 months, because that's not in our capacity at our size right now.
I think a question on a lot of people's minds and a pain point for most people listening will be email. So you seem to be at least confident in your treatment of email. 400 is a lot of email. Do you have any particular commandments, do's, do nots, times you check, things you check first, any types of systems or approaches that allow you to maintain a degree of sanity with the amount of email that you must receive?
You're going to hate this answer, too. I am terrible at it. It used to be not so long ago that I personally replied to absolutely every single email that came in myself. And I used to have an auto sign that basically was like, if I don't reply to you within 5 minutes, I'm dead or asleep. And it's the opposite of everything that you stand for. I know that. It's like, I was listening to Jason Fried. So Jason Fried's a friend. I was listening to his podcast with you, and I don't get it at all. Like, I am not. I would love nothing more than to rework or to not work. Work 4-day weeks or to have 6-week projects and all the stuff that he espouses. He's a friend. He's an investor in one of my businesses. But man, that's not how I function at all. And I weirdly think that he misses cause and effect a little bit. Like, he has a very successful company, and that's the cause that allows the effect, which is the ability to manage your time really well. I live really paranoid. I'm more comfortable that way. And also, I kind of feel like a weird moral responsibility to reply to the people who've taken their time out of their day to write us a note, even if it's not like critical business for me. And one of the things I did for about 10 years that I loved doing when we first started Alinea is that I would have Google alerts set up, and I would find some blog, that only like some woman and her mother read, and I would reply personally, like say, wow, thank you for the great write-up of Alinea. And they would be kind of mind blown that I found it and all that. I treated email that way for a long period of time. Unfortunately, now I can't quite do that. So I do have a bunch of filters and whatnot, but I didn't even set them up. My business partner, Brian Fitzpatrick, who used to be the head of Google Chicago, and he runs the engineering team. He's the CTO of Tock. He kind of said, like, dude, you're slipping, man. Like, you need to create some filters and get some stuff that's directly to you. So he went into my Gmail accounts and kind of forced the issue for me. But so now I can't quite do that. I do wake up in the morning and look at sort of our bazillion social media messages and whatnot, kind of pick a random one and just answer it. Like, I want to be involved in knowing what our customers are asking, what they're doing, what they're saying, what they're replying. Anything that's a complaint actually gets brought directly via email to a complaint tracker that me and Grant see. And so luckily there aren't that many of those, but anytime you serve 5,000 or 6,000 people a week, you're going to get, something going wrong. But man, I'm terrible at it, honestly. And like I've tried, I will tell you a funny thing is that when I go away on vacation, I do try to, concoct a pretty funny, I basically say, like, look, I'm going to be in a mountain or on a boat or whatever, and I'm not going to be able to reply. And so I would make these elaborate stories up, almost as like a fun piece of art project as to why I couldn't do it. And so one year, every time I went away, I would basically said, like, I'm going to visit a panda that I adopted, and I'm going back to Chicago. And it ended the year around Christmas time when I went on break with a picture of a baby panda and a really kind of mediocre Photoshop job of me standing there with the panda. And the Chicago Tribune called me up like 3 days later going, is it going to the Lincoln Park Zoo? And I was like, no, dear God, it's not. And the following there is no panda. Like, that's what I wrote back. That was my entire reply to that. And then the following year I said, like, I like to talk, as you might be able to tell. And so everyone who knows me knows that, like, I can just go on and on, right? And so I said I was going to a combination of a tantric sex retreat and silence retreat for 8 days to explore my both inner and outer self. And with some elaborate
this is your out of office reply.
That's my out of office reply. And I mean, anybody would get that, right? And so I thought that was really funny. And then about 2 years later, I bumped into some guy who worked for a very big corporation, and they wanted to do some work with the Alinea Group, and it was like kind of a consulting project, very lucrative. And he was looking at me really funny, And I said, like, what's up? And he said, well, I really wish we had worked together, but, then you went to that sex retreat, and I just couldn't get it past everybody. And I was just like, I was looking at him going, like, what are you talking about? And then I remembered, like, 4 years earlier, my out of office reply. And I told him, like, that it was kind of a joke, like the panda. And he did not find any humor in it. And I did. I thought it was hilarious. Even though we lost the business, I thought it was really funny. So if you ever get a really unusual out-of-office reply from me, it's fiction, probably.
I love that. I mean, if you're serious all the time, you're never going to get the actual serious work done. You're going to burn out before that ever happens. Yeah. I also want to underscore one thing, and then I want to ask you about a black box that you and I have talked about quite a bit, which is publishing. The fact that you pick a message to reply to, even if it's one, is really important. And I've noticed this certainly with the audience that I have, listeners, readers, etc., it is not physically possible for me to reply to everyone. It would also be anathema to everything that I'm espousing in many of the books. But I do want to demonstrate that I am listening. And I think that it goes a really long way, even if you do not personally reply to people, if you are able to prove that you're paying attention. And that seems to resolve a lot, or at least act as a salve for people out there who very seldom feel heard, which does not always necessitate a response. So I just wanted to point out that it might seem like a drop in the ocean, but it actually has much more further reaching implications when you do it, what you were describing.
Yeah, I feel like it's genuine. First of all, I'm always curious, like what are people writing about to the restaurants? What are they writing about to me? My LinkedIn profile, basically, like I don't really read LinkedIn at all. I keep it. I think it's important to have it. But I don't ever read the messages on there. But in my bio, it basically says, if you can find my email address, I will incite this. I will reply to you. And so that gets rid of all of the marketing crap that comes in. But every now and then I get like, a subject line to the email address that's on there that says basically like, hey, via your LinkedIn bio. And I'll read that and reply. And it just shows me that like, hey, there's an actual human on the other line. It's not just some marketing thing. And B, like they really, really do have something that they want to talk about. And so, it's like little things like that are kind of puzzle filters, I guess, that I call them, like where I just create like a little bit of a barrier. And if you're really into it and you really want to talk to me, you can pretty much find me pretty easily. I'm not that hidden.
Yeah, and the detail is really important here. The mini hurdle. I have a friend, I'm not going to mention by name because he'll get deluged, but he is a very, very successful author and journalist. And when he is hiring for different positions, part-time or full-time, at the bottom of the job description on a job site or wherever it might be, in small print at the very bottom, it will say, do not send a message on this platform. Do not send an email, even though email addresses were given earlier. Call this number and leave a voicemail answering the following things. And automatically he takes the pool of 1,000 people who are going to do the wrong thing and finds the 10 people who are actually paying attention. Yep,
100%.
So publishing, what is, we didn't really talk much about it, but can you give a little bit, just a tiny bit of background on the Aviary, and then some of your related publishing investigations, which I think is not an inappropriate word. If you could give people a little bit of context.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to back up before the Aviary just a little bit and just go like, for a chef, doing a cookbook is something that they dream about if they're a serious chef from the time they're 15. Just like if you're a basketball player, you want to make the NBA, or, if you're a runner, you're going to want to be in the Olympics or whatever. Like to grant to a bunch of chefs having their own ideas in a physical, beautiful cookbook is kind of a holy grail for them. It's very sacred. And what was interesting is that just before Grant was sick, we started getting a lot of publishing offers. And the natural inclination was to go to what he knew, which was Artisan Press, which published the French Laundry book, which is one of the best-selling high-end cookbooks ever. And it's certainly beautiful. It was very revolutionary at its time. I think it was published in about 98, 99, something like that. And the typical publishing deal kind of came into us, which was great that they were coming in, and it was $250,000 to $300,000, and they would basically say, well, out of that, you're going to pay for the designer and the photographer, and you need a 30-day photo shoot, and here are the guidelines for how many photos you want in the book, and to keep costs down and this and that. And I kind of looked at all of that. And all of the offers came in within about 10% of each other, which immediately, the hair on the back of my neck, the spidey sense starts telling me that something back there is pricing this in an unusual way. And then I started going like, oh, this is actually like the music industry.
Very
because
much so.
I knew people in bands that would get signed to a record label back in the day, and they would get a $250,000 advance. Shit, that seems like a lot of money, right? And then all of a sudden, all your studio time comes out of that, and you don't recoup another dime until you've sold, X number of records or CDs, or in this case, books. And then in the contract, it actually said, and the restaurant guarantees that they will buy 2,500 books at half of retail price. And I was like, whoa, that's, you're looking at something like $80,000 right there that goes right back to them in essence. And then I kind of went like, well, I wonder what a book costs to print. And I mean, I just called, I asked them like, well, how much is this book going to cost to print? Well, I don't really know. And so what they would do is that they would always have layers of people so that they said, well, that's not what I do. Like, I am the person that does this. The lawyers give the contract. The printer does the printing. There's
always plausible deniability or plausible ignorance.
Yes, willful plausible ignorance.
Yeah.
And so I do what I start doing. I'm like, well, let's just Google that up and see what it costs to print a book. Or, hey, how many copies of the French Laundry book sold? How many copies of 50 other books that we wanted to emulate or that we thought were well done sold? And man, it's like asking for keys to the Vatican or something when you call a publisher and ask them that. I'm sure you know this, right? You probably know now because you've been so entrenched in the industry, your numbers, and you might know that of some of your colleagues and friends, right? But if you wanted to actually do a meaningful comparison across the industry, it's almost impossible to do it, even though that there's a company that does that. Then you start trying to reverse engineer it, and you go to the New York Times, which you can go to the New York Times website and just look at how is the New York Times, bestseller list created. And on their own site, they say it's a compendium of known publishers, like publishing houses, as well as these top 50 retailers, back in the day. And it's a gameable system, right? Like the way that the publishers want to do it is that they want to ship out all the books at the same time because that's how they're counted for the New York Times bestseller list and stuff.
I should also note it's not only gameable, but it's also conversely highly subjective within the New York Times. So there's a lot of wiggle room. In other words,
yes.
It is not like the Olympics where you're like, okay, clear, gold, silver, bronze, video replay. We know exactly how this was tabulated.
So the more that we dug, the more that we got more and more curious, a little bit angry actually. But Grant was weirdly angry at me because he's going like, well, dude, why do you care? It's like, I've been wanting this since I was 15. And I was like, well, look, if this is our budget, it's not going to be the book you want. It's not going to be as good as you want it to be because we're not going to be able to spend 6 months doing the photography. We're not going to be able to get great pages. We're not going to be able to get a picture of every dish. What do people cook in a cookbook? Well, they tend to cook those pages where they see a picture of the final dish because you know what? It looks delicious. You know what it's supposed to look like. You got something to emulate at least, right? And so when we did the specs for the book, I had one of the best publishers in America say, if you do that book, there's no way you sell more than 5,000 of them. No way. And no one's going to publish it. And you can't use metric. And you can't use a gram scale. And you can't have that font. And you can't have those pictures in full bleed. And it'll cost way too much to print. And so it took about a month and a half before I got lucky. And I called a print broker who had actually brokered the print job of one of the famous books. And I was expecting that the book retailed for $60. It would cost $15 to print, $20. I didn't know anything about it. And when he told me it was $2.23 per book to print per 30,000 copy run, I went, no way, like that. And he went, well, it's probably less now. He thought I meant it was too much.
Right.
And instantaneously I went, oh shit, everything makes sense. And when I would call publishers and tell them this, they would go, oh yeah, but look, we did 40 different prints, 40 different books last year. Only 5 of them did well. And I'm like, that's your problem, man. Like, I know what we're going to sell well. I don't really give a shit if you lost 35% of the time and need to spread your portfolio risk. I'm the one you're spreading it on. Right. And so we decided with the Alinea book, we put together like 20 pages, and Martin made this beautiful stainless steel bracketing system, and we shipped it out to 8 different publishers we liked, 2 of which were art houses that had never done a cookbook. And they all came back and same all the usual criticism, except for Aaron Weiner at 10 Speed Press.
Yeah, smart guy, by the way.
Yeah, and he basically said, I'm going to make you an unusual offer, no advance at all, and we can negotiate. Essentially, we'll just be the distributor, and we'll negotiate out like what that looks like, and we'll help you with the printing, and we'll help you with the editing, which we're both really good at. And within 10 minutes, we had struck a deal whereby any of the books that we bought or sold for ourselves, for our restaurant, we paid actual printing cost, not wholesale, actual printing cost. Anything that they sold and distributed through their channels, they would get about 27% of the sale price, which means that we got 73% of that. These are like state secrets, right? Like nobody tells this stuff. And so for years, I was walking around with this knowledge where if we sold 100,000 books, say, that would be the equivalent of selling like 500,000 books on any other deal. And we got to control the quality of it. And we won both the James Beard Award for best cooking from a professional point of view, best cookbook of the year. And we won, Martin and Laura Kastner won the Communication Arts Award, where if you're a designer, that's like their annual is like, that's like getting the Oscar, right?
Yeah. Similarly, for people who don't know, I mean, the James Beard Awards are also very much like the Oscars.
Yeah. So we felt like really vindicated on that. The book still sells. This is 8 years later. We still sell 7,000 to 8,000 copies a year. And when we did the Aviary, which is our bar that's a non-bar that we talked about earlier, we started getting all of the same offers again. And this time it was really easy to go like, just kind of like go like, oh, that's cute. Like, and so I should add that I wrote a book of, Grant and I wrote his memoir together that we didn't use a ghostwriter. We wrote it ourselves, called Life on the Line. And for that one, we did a traditional book deal. But after our agent kind of got it halfway, I got on a plane, flew out there, and then brokered the deal myself. And I got a giant multiple of the highest bid by doing essentially a reverse Dutch auction, starting at a really high price and working my way downward.
Can you explain to people just briefly what that means?
Yeah. So basically, like, here, I'll do this. Like, let's say, I think one of the great problems, like, to solve, one of the black boxes is the agency problem. Let's say you want to sell your house. You put it on the market, and the agent's going to get, 4 to 5% of the sale price. That's a lot for something that's like your biggest investment in your life. But they kind of say, like, they control the information, they control the MLS, all that. Will they, if they're the seller's agent, get the highest price for you? And the answer is almost certainly not, because let's say a house is going to sell for $500,000, they're going to get 4% of that. That's $20,000. If they get $490,000, it's almost no difference to them, right? $400 difference. But if they lose the deal over that last $10,000, it's a lot. So they want to price a home so that it sells quickly, so that they can keep their deal flow going, and they don't really care about maximizing their last dollar. Whereas for you, that last dollar is actually like $9,600. It's a lot more money. So what I do whenever I've sold real estate is that I figure out what the intrinsic value is of the house. Like, what's the bare minimum that I'd be willing to sell it for? And I price it just slightly higher than that. And I tell all the agents in the whole town, I will pay you 50% of everything over 10% higher than that. And they all say, oh, that's against the real estate ethics code, or I would never do that deal because it would subvert all my other deals, or whatever. And then what happens is 2 days later, you get like a dozen phone calls, and they've priced it like 40% higher. And it sells in 2 days.
Yeah. That's
because
amazing.
now they're actually working for you, right?
Yeah.
Well, similarly, I went into that publishing negotiation, and I was kind of like, by the way, the agent, it's probably look-upable. She's great, like great person. I don't think she even knows that that's what was happening. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't even think she just knows that, like, hey, she was brought up in this industry for this company, and that's the way it works. And she would for sure dispute everything I just said. She would say, I always try to get the highest price. But I went in and I just went like, look, I'm not going to spend my time doing this for X. So I need 4 times that. And she was like, there's no way you'll ever get that. You've never written a book before. And I said, well, we did the Alinea book. She said, that's a cookbook. It doesn't count. These are words, you know? So I went to the publishers that all bid on it, and I just got them all on a conference call and just started at a really high price. And every couple seconds I went down $10,000. And then one of them blinked and bought it.
What was the
And that's a great way. That's a great method of price discovery. Like if you think about it, most auctions, even like you go to a charity event or whatever, and they start low and they try to get interest going high. It's often the case that if they start really, really high and start going down, people start going like, oh my God, someone's going to say something. Like, I would pay that. Someone else must as well. They could be off by a factor of 30%, and they'll never even know it because there's only one bid that ever happens.
Mm-hmm. Now,
so no one knows how off they are.
Now, on that phone call, where you're like, hey guys, would love to get you on the phone, and then publisher
said no right away.
So I guess my question is, did they know that they were signing up for a like Mexican standoff slash?
Yes, they did. Yes.
Oh, they did. They did.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
All
so I went and met with them all personally. Kind of said,
or if you're like, John, I'd love to
get.
get you on the phone, and that's like, all right, congratulations, guys.
No. Yeah, you can't ambush people to a Mexican standoff. Yes, you can't do that.
Okay.
I mean, you could. It might be fun, but I didn't do that.
Right.
I went and talked. I created enticement. I sold on my ability to actually do it. It was a bit like doing the no phones with the software. Like, I was like, well, if I get a really big contract, I'll have to figure out how to write a book, and that'll be a lot of pressure. And so I did that, and I wrote it, and I turned it in on time, which apparently no one does.
Very, very rare. Yeah.
Because when I sent it to them, on the day it was due, they went, "What's this?" And I'm like, "That's the manuscript."
Yeah.
And they went, "Oh, that's cute."
Well, it's kind of like showing up at the restaurant on time as a diner and then being seated at the appointed time.
Apparently very rare.
It's just this like open lie.
Do you turn your books in on time?
I do, actually. Yeah.
I believe that.
Yeah, I do turn my books in on time, and we could get into that separate time.
I just wanted to ask you a question.
No, I do.
You know?
I do. I do not turn them in at the expected length. But
a little longer, perhaps.
I do tend to turn them in on time.
I believe that. So what happened with the Aviary is that we basically couldn't figure out how to do another book because the Alinea book was such a project, and Martin was on to other things, and we didn't want to do it traditionally, and I didn't know anyone who could do what we wanted to do. And then there was this guy, Alan Hemberger, and boy, if you get nothing else from this whole talk and you've made it this far, go Google Alan and Alinea. Alan is a procedural effects artist. He worked at Weta Studios on all the Hobbit movies, doing like hair and water and things like that. So he writes the physics that then makes the magic, right? And then he worked at Pixar. And while he was at Pixar, and his wife, Sarah, worked at Industrial Light and Magic as the graphics designer, he was given by Sarah a copy of the Alinea book to go full circle, and became just fascinated with it. Was not a cook, didn't know how to cook, and did the Julie and Julia thing. He spent 5 years not only cooking his way through the entire book, but also would do things like, well, I don't know where to get this plate, and I've always wanted to learn how to fire porcelain.
Alan, for people wondering, is Allen. There are also videos of Alan and Alinea. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he's an autodidact. Like, this guy learns and learns and learns, and is the kind of person that goes to the black box and goes, I'm going to learn how to forge knives, and I'm going to learn how to fire porcelain. And by the way, I'm going to cook everything in there, and I'm going to take pictures of it, and I'm going to make a book documenting that. And when he asked if he could use, like, we had kind of a little email relationship, and he came out to Alinea once to ask Grant some questions about how to make something because it wasn't working. And when Grant kind of threw up his arms and go, well, the book might be wrong. Like Alan's world view was shattered. It was like the Bible. And he was kind of like, what do you mean it could be wrong? He goes, well, we did have some errata in there. Like, we documented hundreds of recipes. It could be wrong. And at that point, Alan, like, his mentality changed. It's in the video. And we got to know him, and I got to know him. And when he sent me the book, it wasn't what I was expecting. I was expecting like a homegrown book. And what I got was, a 400-page, beautifully illustrated, beautifully written book about a person's journey of learning. And it was called the Alinea Project. And I had no idea that he had done anything like this. And so suddenly I thought to myself immediately, and it's in the intro to the Aviary book, I texted him and said, holy shit, you're crazy. And I have ideas. And after waiting for like 4 or 5 years to do a book on the Aviary, I immediately was like, this is the guy to do the book. Now I need to lure him out of Pixar, which is about the best place to work in the world. And then I found out his wife worked at Industrial Light and Magic, and she did all the graphic design. And I was like, this is perfect. You guys need to quit your jobs and move to Chicago. And they flew out. We had some conversations about what that might look like. It was very much a partnership. They would have equity in the book. We would have creative freedom to do it exactly the way we wanted. We knew more about the printing and the bidding and all of that, so I wasn't worried about the economics of it anymore. I was worried about trying to make something really awesome. And right as they were about to say yes, they found out they were going to have a baby. So they called me up one day and said, oh my God. And I was like, oh, they got cold feet. Oh no. And they said, we're pregnant. We're going to have a baby. And I said, okay, well, we're going to wait a year because there's no way in the world I'm letting you move out of your comfort zone and have a child and have that change of life. And they thought I was like punting on them just because, like, in a discriminatory way. And I said, nope, we're not going to do this with anyone else. We'll wait as long as it takes. And about a year and a half later, they moved to Chicago. And we spent the last year and a half, set up a studio of our own, spent the last year and a half doing this book. Did a Kickstarter to just essentially raise awareness for it. We raised almost $500,000 in the Kickstarter. We've sold about another $300,000 a book since then. It comes out in October. You can go to the alineabook.com. And the coolest part of that website is that if you look at
the Alinea book?
Oh, sorry, the aviarybook.com.
All right.
Oh, great, Nick.
Yeah.
Bury the lead, Nick. Bury the lead. What genius marketing right there. So, the aviarybook.com. But the coolest part of that is, other than, of course, your ability to buy said book, is Alan kept a blog on there called Our Progress. And in it, he details every single aspect of what it takes to make a book like this, right down to line screens and compositing photos of, like, one of the things that every single book publisher told me is that you can't sell a cocktail book for more than $30. There's no market for it. And you don't need pictures because it's just liquid in a glass. And I think we blew that out of the water with what the book looks like. I think that because certain things like fire are really hard to photograph. There's a great picture in there of this one cocktail where we spray some anise and we light it on fire, and it creates an aroma into the bowl that it's served in. It's called Loaded to the Gun Walls. It's a Batavia rock cocktail. And like that took a composite of 18 different photographs. And so he breaks down the photography techniques and also the New York Times bestseller list. And I showed him like how, Google target marketing works and Facebook ads work and all that. And all of a sudden he went, holy shit, I had no idea you could do this. So we are going completely without a distributor or publisher this time. And I think we're going to set I don't know. Like I'm either completely delusional. It wouldn't surprise me if we sold 500,000 of these.
Yeah, and
in the next 2 or 3 years.
And it's not a $9.95 book either, which it shouldn't be, right? I mean, it's $85. We've invested close to $1 million all the way in around it, and it looks like it. I think. I hope. From what I've seen, it looks like it would cost more than that. Yeah, well, we did it. We did it all ourselves too. It's really like a 5-person project.
It's deep enough that if a professional gets it, they're going to learn a lot. But I'd say about 35-40% of it can be done at home, because unlike the Alinea book where, hey, you got to go out and buy a duck, like, in your local grocery, you might not have this kind of duck or whatever. If you need some Flor de Cana rum or, a certain kind of tequila or whatever, you just go to your local liquor store, and it's exactly the same thing that we use. That product is universal.
I read somewhere, I don't think it's taking us too far afield. I read somewhere that you consider yourself a tequila guy, or at least in part a tequila guy. Do you have any favorite tequilas or concoctions?
Well, I'm going to do a little video promo for the book that we just filmed last week, where essentially I work with Eric Jeffus, who's one of our bartenders in the office, which is our little speakeasy below the aviary.
Which is amazing. If people have the opportunity, they should check it out.
It's basically Grant just said, hey, everything upstairs, people are going to think it's Alinea smoke and mirrors. We need to prove we can make a real cocktail. So one of the foundational cocktails for me is a daiquiri. It's I say 3 ingredients and a million ways to fuck it up. It's just lime, sugar, and rum. That's all it is. And yet, like, most bars you go into will make a terrible daiquiri, or they'll blend it, or blah blah blah, right? But a great daiquiri is really, really transformative. So did a video on that, and then I always make a half mezcal margarita. That's my favorite drink. All I'm doing is I'm taking some reposado and a little bit of mezcal in equal weights, along with some Grand Marnier or Cointreau equivalent, and lime and simple syrup. That's it. That's all there is to it. Man, I love the simple stuff like that. And then we have a whole section in the book on old whiskeys, dusty bottles, old gins. Like, there's a growing movement to kind of rediscover some of the distilleries in America that were really, really, really great, that don't exist anymore, that were more artisanal at the time. You can still find those bottles around. It's a little bit easier than, like, someone like wine collecting or something like that. And man, it's like an endlessly fascinating thing. I don't consider myself a cocktail person 10 years ago. I really loved wine. I felt like from a health perspective, it was better as well. But just like anything else, if you have a well-constructed cocktail and something of high quality, it's an additive thing. Like, you can have it in a meal and it can make the meal better. Whereas, like, a vodka tonic's just boozing. And it's just getting drunk. That's not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to make things it's really a culinary approach to cocktails. And man, it's endlessly fascinating, just like anything else in this world.
And the I would also say, just contrasting, say, someone who wants to recreate something from Alinea, which you certainly could do. I mean, Alan proved that with something from the aviary. There is also a tremendous amount of theater and presentation dynamism that you can create with cocktails that does not have to be super expensive or super complicated. And I mean, certainly you guys are able to go as complex as you want to go, which is stunning. And I've spent time at the aviary, but it's also,
you can easily make some ice with Peychaud's bitters in it or something like that. And then as the ice melts in the cocktail, it's going to change the flavor. And it's going to look really cool too. Doing some of these things at home is not hard. I did a dinner party once where it was like, a cocktail party, probably had 40 people at my house. And each room in my house had all of the ingredients for the cocktail and then little instructions on how to make it themselves. So that took away the need for a bartender, because they're terrible anyway, anyone that you'd bring in and, that a caterer or something like that. And the other cool thing is that people got really into it. They went like, oh, like, now I know how to make an old fashioned. Now I know how to make a Manhattan. The one that I discovered that party was a Frisco sour. It had like Benedictine whiskey and lemon, it was really delicious. So it can be more than just like a strong cocktail. It can be really delicate and interesting.
Mm-hmm. And people can learn all about this at theaviarybook.com. Is that right?
That's right. Yep.
Well, Nick, I've two rapid fire questions that are unrelated, and then I think we're gonna bring this neat and tidy round one podcast to a close. But we've talked about books, and everybody should not only check out the Aviary book, but also if they have a chance, go to the Aviary. It is tremendous, and you can also get some delicious bites and food. At least last time I was there,
Still can
at the Aviary. So it is a bit of a, I hesitate to call it a workaround, but you guys have some very, very popular establishments. If you want to sample the food, this is also a great way to do it. And the drinks are just incredible. So it's a real sort of destination that makes a trip to Chicago worth it in and of itself. So I would recommend not only checking out the book, but also checking out a lot of what you guys are up to. Aside from that, books you have gifted the most to other people, outside of those that you've made yourself, what are the books that you've gifted the most to other people?
Yeah, I named one of them already. Fooled by Randomness. Almost everyone in my office is forced to read that. And I've definitely given that away. Boy, that's a tricky one because just like I said, I can't remember books very well, but that's certainly probably number one on a business side of things. And then on the other side, I tend to give away what I would call vintage art books. So it's not a book people can buy, I'm sorry to say, but occasionally I'll be at like a used bookstore and I'll find some of these great old art books. And I buy a few of them. And then when I want to thank someone for something, I send them that.
Peregrinations of an Epicurean, something like that.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, like I bought, like, when I want to give someone something, I try to make it something that and I really want to make it a great gift. I try to get it something that you can't buy, right? And so I bought an old typewriter, and when I write a thank you note, I type it up on the old typewriter. And it is the most confounding thing to people. Because they look at it and they go, how did you do that? I'm like, on a 1922 typewriter. It's like a personal artisanal thing. But I know that that's not what you're getting at.
No.
Like, I can't really think of like the number one. I'm sure once we end this, I'll immediately think of it. And if I do, I'll send it to you so you can link to it.
I think the answer is more interesting with the typewriter. So I think what I'm getting at was whatever you just offered. So that's perfect. And if you come up with anything else, we can put it in the show notes. This next one can be tough at times for folks, but the billboard questions. So metaphorically speaking, non-commercial, no advertising, but if you could get a word, a quote, a sentence, a question up on a billboard to transmit something to millions or billions of people, does anything come to mind that you might put on that billboard?
I don't know why this came to mind, but the word would be pause. I have no idea why that came to mind, but I think in talking through this whole thing, you kept asking me, like, why are you digging this black box or whatever, or it'd be like curiosity. Like, and I think those are two. I'm thinking of those in the same way. I'm not saying pause like stop. I'm saying think, right? And so I think the hallmark of the people that I like as friends the best is what we try to instill in our kids, and the reason I like my wife so much and all that is that intellectual curiosity is everything. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know, how do you get that on a billboard? I think pause or be curious or something like that. I know it's cliche, but I think that's the thread that ties everything together.
Yeah, you do pause a lot, even though on a macro level you seem to be moving at hyperspeed a lot of the time. There are a lot of pauses built into that speed, if that makes sense. From what I've noticed, I mean, you were simultaneously one of the craziest fuckers I know and least craziest fuckers I know, if that makes sense.
Oh, good. That's a great compliment. Thank you. I'll take it. I'll take it.
And where can people find you? I know you have, of course, the AlineaGroup.com, you have ExploreTalk.com, the AviaryBook.com, which is the sort of the most timely for people to check out right now. If people want to say hello or follow you on social, where are the best places, best handles for that?
Yep. Instagram, which is Kokonas, Kokonas, and Twitter is Nick Kokonas, Nick. And hey, it's all Googleable, right? Like, so beyond that, if you could figure out my email address, I'll probably answer. Although, given the reach of your podcast, perhaps I will be inundated. It might take a while.
Yeah, that might be a hug of death situation, but we will.
That's okay.
TBD.
Good problem to have, I suppose.
Good problem to have. Nick, this was a blast. Thank you so much for taking the time. I really, really appreciate it. And many more conversations to be had. This, I think, another trip to Chicago may be in order soon.
I was going to say, I hope we see you here soon.
I know. I need to get back. And to everybody listening, we've made mention of the show notes, links to everything we've discussed, which you will be able to find at tim.blog/podcast, as with this episode and certainly every other episode. And until next time, thank you so much for listening. Hey guys, this is Tim again. Just a few more things before you take off. Number one, this is 5 Bullet Friday. Do you want to get a short email from me? Would you enjoy getting a short email from me every Friday that provides a little morsel of fun before the weekend? And 5 Bullet Friday is a very short email where I share the coolest things I've found or that I've been pondering over the week. That could include favorite new albums that I've discovered. It could include gizmos and gadgets and all sorts of weird shit that I've somehow dug up in the world of the esoteric as I do. It could include favorite articles that I've read and that I've shared with my close friends, for instance. And it's very short. It's just a little tiny bite of goodness before you head off for the weekend. So if you want to receive that, check it out. Just go to 4hourworkweek.com. That's 4hourworkweek.com, all spelled out, and just drop in your email, and you will get the very next one. And if you sign up, I hope you enjoy it. This episode is brought to you by Charlotte's Web, which makes a CBD oil, a hemp extract that has become one of my go-to tools. Now, I have never really talked about CBD oil, and cannabis has never really been the plant for me. I know we're talking about hemp, but nonetheless, after several nights of inexplicable insomnia, this was about a year ago, I just could not get to sleep to save my life. And after other fixes failed, so melatonin, California poppy, extract, an elite athlete introduced me to this non-psychoactive extract, and bam! Problem solved. I had some of the best sleep that I'd had in months. Now, I don't use sleep aids on a daily basis, but this has become part of my toolkit, and I hope to be exploring other applications soon. CBD oil products have exploded in popularity in the health and wellness and fitness worlds, and Charlotte's Web is one of the top players that offers broad spectrum hemp extract with CBD in the form of oils, capsules, and topical products. Charlotte's Web products will not get you high, so that maybe that is good news, maybe bad news to you, but it does have some powerful benefits and applications, and it works with your body's existing endocannabinoid system. Endo meaning from within, like endo versus exoskeleton, for instance. So endocannabinoid system works with your body. Some of the most common uses are for relief from everyday stressors, help in supporting restful sleep, which is what I most often use it for, to bring about a sense of calm and focus. A lot of my friends use it for that. CBD is also known, or becoming known, for helping athletes to recover from exercise-induced inflammation. Charlotte's Web hemp extract has naturally occurring terpenes, flavonoids, and other valuable hemp compounds that work synergistically to heighten positive effects, sometimes referred to as the entourage effect, which you guys can look up, making it more complete than single compound CBD alternatives, or at least that is what I've been told. I do not know much about CBD alternatives nor single compound. In any case, check it out. This stuff has really worked for me. So jump over to cwhemp.com/Tim. CW is in Charlotte's Web. cwhemp.com/Tim to take a quick quiz which will determine the best product for your particular aims, lifestyle, etc. And they ship to all 50 states. Charlotte's Web are offering listeners of this podcast 10% off of their purchase. While there are some exclusions, I personally use the extra strength CBD oils or the extra strength capsules, and you can see what might be a fit for you on that page. And there is a 30-day risk-free guarantee, so why not try it out? So get 10% off of your purchase at cwhemp.com/Tim. And disclaimer, these statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Enjoy. This episode is brought to you by 99 Designs. 99 Designs is the global creative platform that makes it easy for designers and clients to work together. From logos to apps, business cards, packaging to books, you name it, 99 Designs is the go-to design resource for any budget. Right now, my listeners, that's you guys, can get $50 off a logo and brand identity package from 99 Designs, plus a free upgrade that lets you promote your project on the platform, which is an additional $99 value by checking out 99designs.com/Tim50. That's TIM50. So 99designs.com/Tim50. As many of you know, I've used 99 Designs for many, many years now. I've used them for book covers, including mock-ups for The 4-Hour Body, which went on to become a #1 New York Times bestseller, illustrations for the multi-volume The Tao of Seneca, an ebook series basically, and other graphic design projects, and I've been very impressed by the quality of their designers and illustrators. And you can check out all sorts of stuff like Tao of Seneca to get an idea. They're really mind-boggling. Most recently, I used 99 Designs to update the illustrations and layout of my 5 Morning Rituals ebook. This is a PDF that I offer as an incentive to get people to sign up for my newsletter. The illustrations inside are gorgeous, and I loved working with the designer who we ended up selecting for the project. You can take a look at that. This is a real-world example of the type of thing that I use 99 Designs for at 99designs.com/Tim50. 99 Designs Designer Search Tool connects you directly with one designer based on design category or industry specialization, style, skill level, availability, and more. You just check off the boxes that you need to satisfy the criteria you want, and it will bring up the best matches. Or you can start a contest. You invite the entire community to take a shot at your project, and then you pick your favorite. So, to get $50 off your first logo and brand identity package, as well as additional promotion on the platform with the free upgrade, please visit 99designs.com/Tim50. That's 99designs.com/Tim50, and click on the link on the landing page. Check it out, 99designs.com/Tim50.